The sun was a hammer that never stopped swinging. It beat down upon the broken spine of the territory, turning the red rock mesas into anvils that radiated a heat so intense it distorted the air itself. Nothing moved in the vast, shimmering distance except the heat haze, which danced like ghosts over the alkali flats. The sky was a pale, bleached blue, stripped of all color by the ferocity of noon. High above, a single vulture circled in a slow, patient spiral, a black speck waiting for the land to claim its due. Elias Carter pulled the brim of his hat lower, squinting against the glare. The dust that coated his face was thick enough to crack when he frowned. He rode a roan mare that had seen better years, her coat dull with sweat and grit, her head bowing low as she picked her way through a tangle of thorny mesquite and cholla cactus. The leather of his saddle creaked, a dry, rhythmic protest that was the only sound in the dead silence of the canyon. He was a man built of hard angles and scar tissue, 32 years old but carrying the weight of 50 in the lines around his eyes. He wore a faded calico shirt that had once been blue, now stained the color of the earth, and canvas trousers tucked into worn boots. A Winchester rifle sat in the scabbard under his leg, the wood stock smooth from years of handling. He was alone, as he had been for the better part of 5 years. Elias preferred the silence. It was cleaner than the noise of towns, safer than the crowded saloons where men drank to forget what they had done or what they intended to do. Here, in the borderlands, the only judgment came from survival. If you found water, you lived. If your horse stepped in a gopher hole, you died. It was a simple, brutal mathematics that Elias understood. He was tracking a mule that had wandered off from his cabin 2 days prior, a stubborn animal that represented a significant portion of his net worth. His cabin was miles back, a rough structure of pine logs and mud chinking perched near a creek that was slowly choking to death in the drought. It was a lonely place, filled with the smell of gun oil and stale coffee. But it was his. It was the place he had chosen to hide from the world, and more importantly, from himself. As the mare stepped over a jagged ridge of limestone, Elias paused, his gaze drifting toward the distant mountains that rose like jagged teeth against the horizon. A familiar, cold sickness coiled in his gut. Those mountains held memories he had tried to drown in cheap whiskey and silence. He remembered the smell of burning wickiups. It was a scent that never left you, distinct from a wood fire, greasier, heavier. He remembered the sound of the cavalry bugle cutting through the dawn, the thunder of hooves, and the terrible, high-pitched screaming of women and children running for cover that did not exist. He had been a scout then, young and foolish, believing the lies about pacification and safety. He had ridden ahead, finding the trails, leading the bluecoats to the hidden valleys. He had told himself he was doing a job. He had told himself it was war, but war was supposed to be men fighting men. What he had seen, what he had helped facilitate, was slaughter. Elias shook his head, physically scattering the memory like a persistent fly. He nudged the mare forward. He had walked away from the army 5 years ago, leaving his pay and his reputation in the dirt, but the ghosts rode pillion with him every day. The trail he was following dipped into a narrow, rocky wash, a scar in the earth where water flooded violently once a year and left dry bones the rest of the time. The silence here was deeper, magnified by the canyon walls. Then he heard it. It was not the bray of his lost mule. It was a sound entirely out of place in this desolation, a sharp, human gasp, followed by the scrabble of boots against loose shale. Elias reined in the mare instantly. His hand went to the colt on his hip, a reflex honed by a decade of living where life was cheap. He sat motionless, listening. The wind hissed through the dry brush. He heard it again, a low moan, laced with pain. He dismounted, his boots crunching softly on the gravel. He tied the mare to a sturdy creosote bush and moved forward, crouching low, his eyes scanning the shadows of the wash. He rounded a large boulder, red as dried blood, and stopped. A woman lay on the ground, curled on her side in the dirt. She was young, perhaps 20, her long black hair loose and tangled with twigs. She wore a dress of buckskin, stained with dust and travel. and moccasins that were worn through at the toes. She was Apache. The realization hit Elias with a jolt of adrenaline. To find an Apache woman alone this far from the reservations or the strongholds in the mountains was rare, and usually meant trouble followed close behind. He took a step forward, and the woman's body snapped rigid. She rolled onto her back, her eyes flying open. They were dark, fever-bright, and filled with a ferocity that stopped Elias in his tracks. In her right hand, she gripped a knife, a rusted, dull blade, but she held it like she knew how to use it. Her hand trembled violently, but the point was aimed straight at his chest. "Stay back," she rasped. Her voice was dry, cracking like old parchment. She spoke in her own tongue first, then switched to broken, guttural English. "White soldier, stay back." Elias raised his hand slowly, palms open. "I am not a soldier," he said, keeping his voice low and steady, the way one spoke to a spooked horse. "I am just a man." "Liar!" she spat. Her eyes darted frantically, looking past him for the others she was sure were coming. Elias looked at her more closely. Her skin was ashen beneath the dust. Sweat beaded on her forehead despite the dry heat. Then he saw her leg. Her left calf was exposed where the skirt had ridden up. It was swollen to nearly twice its normal size. The skin tight and shiny, mottled with angry purple and black bruising. 2 distinct puncture wounds, weeping dark fluid, marred the flesh just above the ankle. "Rattlesnake?" Elias said. The word hung heavy in the air. The woman, Nalin, let out a shuddering breath. Her arm wavered, the knife dipping. She tried to push herself up, to crawl away from him, but the movement sent a spasm of agony through her body. She cried out, a raw sound of defeat, and collapsed back into the dirt. Elias looked at the sky. It was past noon. The bite looked hours old. The poison was already working its way through her blood, cooking her from the inside out. If he left her, she would be dead before sundown. The coyotes would find her tonight. He looked at the knife she still clutched. He looked at the fierce hatred in her eyes, a hatred born of the same history that haunted his nightmares. If he touched her, if he helped her, and her people found him, they would likely kill him before he could speak. To the Apache, a white man bending over a helpless woman meant only one thing. But then she looked at him again. Her vision was clearly blurring, her eyes rolling slightly, but she blinked hard, fighting to keep him in focus, fighting to stay alive for one more second, one more breath. It was a stubborn, defiant will to survive that he recognized. It was the same thing that had kept him breathing after he had walked away from the army. He cursed softly under his breath. He could not leave her. "I am going to help you," Elias said, stepping closer. "No," she moaned, slashing the knife at the air. It was a weak, clumsy strike. Elias moved fast. He caught her wrist, his grip firm but careful. She thrashed, weak as a kitten, trying to bite him. But he twisted her arm gently until her fingers opened and the knife fell into the dust. He kicked it away. "Be still," he ordered. "You have snake poison in you. If you keep fighting, your heart pumps it faster. Do you want to die here?" Nalin stared at him, her chest heaving. The fight drained out of her, replaced by a terrifying, glassy vacancy. She slumped against the ground. Elias knelt beside her. He pulled a bandana from his pocket and uncorked his canteen, wetting the cloth. He wiped the dirt from the wound. She flinched, a hiss escaping her teeth, but she did not pull away. He drew his own knife, a sharp bowie with a bone handle. Her eyes widened, terrified, fixing on the blade. "I have to cut it," Elias said, meeting her gaze. "I have to get the poison out." He did not wait for permission. He grasped her calf, his hand large and rough against her skin. He made 2 quick, precise incisions over the puncture marks in the shape of a cross. Dark blood welled up instantly. Nalin screamed, a sharp, jagged sound that echoed off the canyon walls, and her head fell back, her body arching. Elias did not hesitate. He bent his head and pressed his mouth to the wound, sucking hard, tasting the metallic copper of blood and the bitter taint of venom. He spat onto the ground. He did it again, And again, it was the old way, the only way he knew. He worked with a grim focus, ignoring the heat, ignoring the flies that buzzed around them. After a few minutes, he sat back, wiping his mouth. He unbuckled his belt and cut a strip of leather from the end, tying it tightly around her leg just below the knee to slow the spread of whatever venom remained. She was shaking now, violent tremors that chattered her teeth. Shock was setting in. Elias looked around. There was no shelter here. The sun was killing her as surely as the snake. He had to get her to the cabin. He slid his arms under her, one beneath her knees, the other behind her back. As he lifted her, he was struck by how light she was, hollowed out by hunger and hardship, yet solid. Her head lolled against his shoulder. Her body was burning hot, radiating a fever heat that soaked through his shirt. For a moment, holding her, he felt a strange, jarring intimacy. He had not held a woman in years, not since a saloon girl in Tucson who had smelled of cheap lavender water and indifference. This woman smelled of sagebrush, wood smoke, and the copper scent of blood. She smelled of the land. She groaned, her hand gripping the front of his shirt, her knuckles white. She looked up at him, her eyes dark pools of confusion. "Blue coat," she whispered, the words slurring. "You. Burn. I am not a blue coat," Elias said, his voice rough. "I am just Elias." He carried her to the horse. Getting her into the saddle was a struggle. She was dead weight, slipping and sliding. He finally managed to get her draped over the horse's neck, bracing her with one arm while he mounted behind her. He pulled her back so she leaned against his chest, her head resting on his shoulder. It was an awkward, desperate embrace. He could feel the rapid, fluttery beat of her heart against his ribs. He spurred the mare forward. The ride back to the cabin was a blur of endurance. The path was steep, winding up through a labyrinth of fallen rock and scrub oak. The mare stumbled twice, hooves clattering on loose shale, sending stones tumbling down into the gorge below. Each time, Elias tightened his arm around Nayland, anchoring her. Clouds began to gather on the western horizon, towering anvils of dark gray that promised a violent, localized storm. The wind picked up, smelling of ozone and rain. Nayland drifted in and out of consciousness. She muttered constantly, a stream of Apache words that sounded like water flowing over stones. Sometimes she argued with people Elias could not see. Sometimes she cried out for her mother. Once, she tried to claw at his arm, convinced he was taking her to a prison camp. "Be easy," Elias murmured, over and over. "We are almost there." They reached the cabin as the sun began to bleed red against the peaks. It sat in a small clearing, a humble, weathered box of timber. Elias slid from the saddle and pulled Nayland down into his arms. She was limp now, her energy spent. He kicked the door open. The inside was dim and cool. He carried her to the narrow cot in the corner, laying her down on the rough wool blanket. He lit the kerosene lantern hanging from a nail, the golden light pushing back the shadows. Elias went to work. He stripped the moccasin and the leather legging from her swollen leg. The limb was angry and hot to the touch, the skin tight as a drum. He took a bucket and went to the creek, returning with cool water. He tore up an old clean shirt to make compresses, laying the wet cloth over the bite. He had a bottle of whiskey, cheap rot gut he kept for bad nights. He poured a generous amount over the open cuts on her leg. Nayland gasped in her sleep, her body jerking, but she did not wake. He sat on a wooden stool beside the bed, watching her. He forced a few drops of water mixed with willow bark tincture between her lips. She resisted at first, clenching her jaw, but eventually swallowed. The night deepened. The wind howled outside, rattling the loose shingles on the roof. Rain began to fall, hard, sporadic drops that hit the dry earth like bullets. In the fevered landscape of Nayland's mind, the cabin dissolved. She was back at the river, the Gila, before the troubles. She was laughing with Sani and Kaya, her sisters. They were washing clothes, splashing water, the sun warm on their backs. Then the sound changed. The splashing became the thud of hooves. The laughter became screams. She saw the blue coats of the soldiers. She saw the flash of sabers. She saw her father standing before the wickiup, raising his rifle. And then she saw him fall, a red flower blooming on his chest. She looked up, and the soldier standing over her father had blue eyes. He had a scar on his chin. She blinked, and the face changed. It was the man from the canyon, the man with the sad eyes. "Why?" she murmured, thrashing on the cot. "Why do you come?" Elias leaned forward, placing a fresh, cool cloth on her forehead. He heard the fear in her voice, understood enough of the tone to know she was reliving a nightmare. "I am here," he said softly. "You are safe, safe," she mocked in her delirium. "No safe, only dead." Elias looked at his hands, resting on his knees. They were large, calloused hands, stained with her blood and the dust of the trail. Hands that had killed, hands that had saved. He wondered if the tally would ever balance. He did not sleep. He sat vigil as the storm broke overhead, thunder shaking the ground. He watched the rise and fall of her chest. He listened to the rain and the coyotes singing their hungry songs in the hills. He felt a strange, terrifying protectiveness over this woman who would likely kill him if she had the strength. It was a tenderness he had thought withered and dead inside him, like the dry creek bed outside. Dawn came gray and washed out. The rain had passed, leaving the world smelling of wet sage and wet earth. Naylin woke slowly. The pain in her leg was a dull, throbbing ache now, not the sharp fire of yesterday. She opened her eyes. Above her was a ceiling of wooden beams and sod, not the sky, not the curved poles of a wickiup. She turned her head. She saw a wood stove, a table with a tin cup, a saddle in the corner. Panic, cold and sharp, pierced through the fog in her mind. She was in a white man's house. She sat up too fast. The room spun. She scrambled backward, pushing herself into the corner of the cot, her back against the rough log wall. Her hand groped for her belt, for her knife, but it was gone. "Where is it?" she demanded, her voice a croak. Elias turned from the stove where he was stirring a pot. He held a wooden spoon. He looked tired, his eyes rimmed with red, a shadow of stubble on his jaw. "Your knife is on the table," he said calmly. Naylin's eyes darted to the table. The knife was there, too far to reach. "You stole me," she accused, her breathing shallow and fast. "You took me while I slept. My sisters will cut your heart out. I found you dying in a wash," Elias said, his voice flat. "A rattler bit you. Do you remember?" Naylin paused. The memory flickered, the buzzing sound, the strike, the fire in her leg, the man finding her. "I remember," she said guardedly. "You should have left me and let you die. Better to die than be a prisoner." Elias turned back to the stove. He poured coffee into a tin cup and ladled beans into a bowl. He walked over to the cot, moving slowly, making sure she saw his hands were full. He set the food and drink on a stool within her reach, then backed away to the other side of the room, leaning against the door frame. He pushed the door wide open. "Look," he said, gesturing to the open land outside. "No bars, no lock. You are not a prisoner. If you can walk, you can leave, but you won't make it a mile on that leg." Naylin looked at the open door. The freedom was there, tantalizing. She looked at her leg. It was bandaged neatly with white cloth. She tested it, moving her ankle. Pain shot up her shin, but it was bearable. The swelling had gone down. She looked at the food. The smell of the beans and bacon fat made her stomach cramp with hunger. She reached for the bowl, watching him over the rim as she ate. She ate like a wolf, quick and desperate. She drank the coffee, the hot liquid scalding her throat. When she was finished, she wiped her mouth with the back of her hand. She studied him. He stood still, watching the morning light on the mountains. He did not look like the ranchers who shot at her people for sport. He did not look like the gold seekers who dug up the earth like maddened badgers. "You move like a soldier," she said suddenly. Elias stiffened. He did not turn around. "You know how to bandage a wound," she continued, her voice gaining strength. "You have a repeating rifle. You ride an army saddle. I bought the saddle." Elias said, "You walk like one. You stand like one. Were you a bluecoat?" Elias turned slowly. He looked at her, and for a moment, Naylin saw a profound, crushing weariness in his face. It was the look of a man who had walked a long way carrying a heavy stone. I was a scout, he said, for the 3rd Cavalry. Nayland recoiled as if he had slapped her. Her lip curled. A scout. The eyes of the enemy. The betrayer who leads the wolves to the flock. I knew it, she hissed. You are a killer of women. I was a scout, Elias repeated, his voice hard. I tracked. I found water. I found trails. But I saw what they did 5 years ago at Sibicu. I saw what they did to the winter camp there, and I took off my coat and I walked away. I haven't touched the army since. He looked down at his boots, his jaw clenched tight. I am sorry for what happened to your people. I cannot change it, but I am not that man anymore. Nayland stared at him. She wanted to hate him. It would be easier to hate him, but she saw the shame in him. It was a living thing, eating him from the inside. She had seen that look before, in the eyes of her own people who had done terrible things to survive. I must go, she said abruptly. You can't walk, Elias said. I must go. My sisters. If I do not return, they will think the worst. They will come hunting. And if they find me here, with a scout, they will burn this cabin with you inside it. Elias looked at her. He knew she was telling the truth. The Apache justice was swift and absolute. Where is your camp? He asked. Nayland hesitated. To tell a white man the location of the camp was treason. But she looked at her leg. She looked at the vast, empty desert outside. She could not walk it. 2 days' ride, she said, in the Dragoon Mountains, near the canyon of the Cottonwoods. Elias nodded. He pushed off the doorframe. I will take you. You? She laughed. A harsh, dry sound. You will be killed before we get within a mile. Maybe, Elias said. He picked up his hat and settled it on his head. But I saved your life. I intend to see you keep it. He went outside. Nayland listened to him working. She heard the chop of an axe, the dragging of poles. An hour later, he returned. He had constructed a travois, 2 long poles lashed to the saddle of his mare, with a blanket stretched between them to form a drag sled. It was the best way to move an injured person over rough ground. Come on, Elias said. He helped her stand. She leaned heavily on him, her arm over his shoulder. Again, the contact was electric, uncomfortable. Her hip pressed against his thigh. He could feel the heat of her skin through her dress. He kept his face neutral, staring straight ahead, but his heart hammered against his ribs. He settled her onto the travois. He tied his canteen to the frame so she could reach it. He mounted the mare. They set out into the blinding light of mid-morning. The desert stretched out before them, a landscape of thorns and beauty. Indifferent to their struggle, the journey was slow. The travois scraped and bumped over the rocks. Elias rode with his rifle across his lap, his eyes scanning the horizon for trouble. Apache raiding parties, army patrols, or bandits. They did not speak much. The silence between them was thick, weighted with the things they could not say. Nayland watched his back. She watched the way he sat in the saddle, the way he scanned the hills. She hated what he had been. She hated the uniform he had once worn. But she watched him give her the last of the water when the sun was high. She watched him stop to check the lashings on the travois, his hands gentle as he adjusted the blanket near her injured leg. When the mare stepped over a deep rut, Nayland slid slightly, and Elias reached back instinctively to steady the poles. His hand brushed her shoulder. He pulled it back as if burned, his neck flushing a deep red beneath the tan. Nayland saw it. She saw the flush. She saw the way he avoided looking at her directly, not out of disrespect, but out of a shy, awkward awareness. He is lonely, she thought, surprised by the insight. He is a wolf with no pack. She shifted her leg, wincing. The pain was there, but she was alive. She looked at the back of the white scout who was risking his life to return her to a people who would likely kill him. Why? She whispered to the wind, so low he could not hear. The sun began its long descent, painting the world in shades of violet and bruised orange. They moved on, a tiny speck in the immense, unforgiving wilderness, bound together by a debt of blood and a strange, growing gravity that neither of them understood. The canyon appeared out of the wasteland like a mirage, a sudden, violent slash of green in a world composed entirely of burnt sienna and dust. Elias Carter saw the tops of the cottonwood trees first, their leaves shivering in the wind, a vibrant, shocking emerald against the red rock walls. The scent of water hit him a moment later, cool, sweet, and laden with the smell of wet mud and willow bark. It was a smell that promised life, but as they drew closer, another scent drifted on the breeze. Wood smoke. Elias tightened his grip on the reins. The mare, sensing the water, picked up her pace, her hooves clattering on the loose shale of the descent. Behind him, the travois scraped and bumped, the long poles groaning against the stone. Naylin lay silent on the blanket. She had been drifting in and out of a doze for the last few miles, exhausted by the pain and the relentless sun. But as the shadow of the canyon walls fell over them, he saw her stiffen. Her eyes opened, dark and alert. She was home, and Elias was walking into the lion's den. He kept his Winchester sheathed. To touch it now would be a death sentence. He kept his hands high on the pommel of the saddle, visible and empty. He sat tall, refusing to slump, though his back ached from days of riding and the tension coiled in his gut was tight enough to snap a rib. They reached the canyon floor. The temperature dropped 10 degrees instantly. A thin stream, no wider than a wagon wheel, cut through the center of the sandy wash, flanked by the massive cottonwoods. Wickiups, dome-shaped dwellings of brush and canvas, were scattered along the bank, blending so perfectly with the landscape that Elias did not see the first one until he was nearly on top of it. Horses nickered from a makeshift corral of mesquite branches. A dog barked, a sharp, jagged sound that echoed off the cliffs. Then the silence broke. It did not happen gradually. One moment, Elias was riding through a quiet village. The next, the earth seemed to spawn warriors. They rose from behind rocks, dropped from the low branches of the trees, and emerged from the brush with a terrifying fluidity. A hand grabbed the bridle of his mare, jerking the animal's head down. Before Elias could react, strong hands gripped his coat and his belt. He was wrenched from the saddle with violent force, hitting the hard-packed earth with a bone-jarring thud. Dust filled his mouth. He tried to scramble up, instinct screaming at him to fight, but a heavy boot slammed into his back, pinning him flat. He felt the cold, unmistakable bite of a knife blade against the skin of his throat. "Stay still," a voice hissed in heavily accented English. Elias froze. He stared into the dirt, breathing in the smell of alkali and horse manure. He could see moccasins surrounding him, a circle of legs and rifle butts. Above him, shouting erupted. It was a chaotic mix of Apache and English, angry and sharp. He heard the travois being inspected, the rustle of the blanket. Then he heard Nalin's voice. It was weak, strained by her injury, but it carried a whip-crack of authority that cut through the noise. "Stop!" she cried out in her own tongue, then repeated it in English for his benefit, or perhaps to make sure he understood she was pleading for him. "Do not kill him." The pressure of the knife against Elias's throat did not ease. A hand grabbed his hair, yanking his head back. He looked up into the face of a warrior who could not have been more than 20, his face painted with streaks of black and yellow, his eyes burning with a hatred so pure it felt like heat. "He is a bluecoat scout," the warrior snarled. "I know his face. He rode with Crook. He saved me," Naylin shouted. She was trying to push herself up on the travois, her face pale and sweating. "Look at my leg. Look at it." The warriors hesitated. The one holding the knife glanced toward the travois. "He found me in the wash," Naylin continued, her voice trembling with exertion. "A rattler. He cut the poison out. He brought me here. If he wanted to kill me, I would be food for the buzzards 3 days ago." The warrior with the knife looked back at Elias. The blade dug in a fraction of an inch deeper, drawing a single bead of blood that trickled hot down Elias's neck. "He is white," the warrior spat. "That is enough. Let him up," a new voice commanded. The circle of men parted. 2 women stepped forward. They moved with a synchronized grace, their buckskin dresses swaying with heavy fringe. They were older than Naylin, their face leaner, harder, etched with the lines of women who had buried husbands and children. These were the sisters. Sani and Kaya. Sani, the eldest, looked at Elias with eyes like flint. There was no pity in them, only a cold, calculating assessment. She looked at the knife at his throat, then at Nayland on the travois, and finally at the wound on Nayland's leg, which had been exposed by the other women. The knife lowered, though the warrior did not step back. Elias slowly pushed himself to his knees, wiping the blood from his neck with a dirty sleeve. He did not speak. He knew that to speak now was to invite death. He let the women judge him. Kaya moved to the travois, her hands gentle as she touched Nayland's face, checking her fever. She spoke rapidly in Apache, her tones sharp with worry and relief. Nayland answered, gesturing to Elias, pointing to the tourniquet he had made, the way the wound had been dressed. Sani turned back to Elias. She walked up to him, stopping only a foot away. She smelled of wood smoke and sage. She reached out and grabbed his chin, turning his face side to side, studying him as one might study a horse at auction. "You were a scout," she said. "It was not a question." "I was," Elias rasped. His throat felt raw. "And now? Now I'm just a man who wants a drink of water." Sani's eyes narrowed. "You brought our sister home. That is the only reason your blood is not already drying on this ground. But do not think this makes us friends. White man," she gestured to the warriors, "take his weapons, all of them." Elias stood still as rough hands patted him down. They took his Colt. They took the Bowie knife from his belt. They pulled the Winchester from the saddle scabbard. When they were done, he felt naked, lighter in a way that left him feeling deeply vulnerable. "Bring him," Sani ordered. "The council will decide." They marched him to a large clearing beneath a limestone bluff that overhung the canyon floor. A fire burned there, low and smokeless. Several older men sat on woven mats, their faces like weathered leather, their eyes dark and unreadable. These were the elders, the memory keepers of the band. Nayland was carried to the edge of the circle, the medicine man, a stooped figure draped in a blanket decorated with hawk feathers, knelt beside her. He unwrapped the bandages Elias had applied. He examined the cross-cut incisions, smelled the wound, and tasted the skin near the bite. He stood up and spoke to the council. His voice was a low rumble. He gestured to the north, to where the snakes bred in the rocks, and then pointed to Elias. Sani translated, her voice flat. "He says the bite was deep. A grandmother snake. He says the cutting was done well. The poison is gone. You saved her life." A murmur went through the council. To save a life created a bond, a spiritual tether that could not be easily severed. The chief, a man named Cochise, not the great legend, but a cousin who bore the name with heavy dignity, looked at Elias. "Why?" the chief asked in English. Elias met his gaze. "I could not leave her to die, even though she is Apache, because she is human," Elias said. The chief studied him for a long time. The silence stretched, thin and taut. Finally, the chief nodded once. "A life for a life," the chief said. "You have given us back a daughter. We will give you your breath, but you cannot leave." Elias blinked. "Why?" "Because you have seen this place," Sani interjected. "Stepping into the circle, you know the trail, you know the water. If we let you go, you could sell that knowledge to the soldiers or the miners." "I gave my word. I am done with that," Elias said. "The word of a white man is like the wind," Sani said bitterly. "It changes direction when the storm comes. No, you stay. You stay until we decide you are not a danger. You stay and you work. You owe a debt to the spirits for the blood you spilled in the past. You will pay it with sweat." "What kind of work?" Elias asked. Sani pointed to the horses, to the wood piles, to the heavy water skins. "Women's work," she said, a flicker of dark humor in her eyes. "You saved her. Now you will serve the camp that she belongs to." Elias looked around the circle. He saw the warriors' hands resting near their knives. He saw Nayland, watching him with wide, anxious eyes. He saw the trap closing, but he also saw the logic in it. He was alive. "I accept," Elias said. The days that followed were a blur of exhaustion and grit. They stripped him of his dignity as efficiently as they had stripped him of his guns. He was given a corner of the camp to sleep in. a patch of dirt near the corrals with no shelter but a thin, rough wool blanket. He woke before dawn, the cold seeping into his bones. The canyon floor was freezing at night, the temperature plummeting as soon as the sun vanished. He would shiver, his teeth chattering, until the first rays of light hit the red rock walls. His labor began immediately. Sani was a relentless taskmaster. She pointed to the empty water skins, made of buffalo bladder and canvas, and then to the stream. "Fill them," she ordered. Elias hauled water. The skins were heavy, awkward, slick with condensation. He carried them on his shoulders, trudging from the stream to the wickiups, his boots sinking into the mud. His back ached, his old scars pulling tight with every step. The warriors watched him as they sharpened their arrows or oiled their rifles, their eyes filled with amusement and contempt. To see a white man, a former scout, doing the work of a camp drudge was a sweet victory. Naylin watched him, too. She lay on a bed of woven mats outside her sister's wickiup, her leg propped up on a bundle of furs. She was healing, her strength returning day by day, but she was forced to rest. She watched Elias chop wood, the axe rising and falling with a steady, rhythmic thud. She saw the sweat soak through his shirt, turning the fabric dark. She saw him struggle with a heavy log, his boots slipping in the dust, and she felt a sharp pang of guilt. He was here because of her. He was enduring this humiliation because he had stopped to help her. Yet, a part of her, a part she was ashamed of, felt a fierce satisfaction. For years, she had watched her people starve while the white settlements grew fat. She had watched her men broken by labor in prison camps, to see the tables turned, to see a white man forced to understand the weight of survival in this land. Felt like balance. The landscape was a constant, brutal companion. The sun was not just heat, it was a physical weight. Dust storms blew up from the south without warning. Walls of brown grit that stung the eyes and coated everything in a fine powder. Elias learned to wrap his scarf around his face, to squint against the wind, to keep working even when he could barely see his own hands. Survival here was not about conquest. It was about cooperation. Elias saw how the Apache used everything. Nothing was wasted. A deer kill provided meat, clothing, tools, and thread. The water was treated with reverence. He began to understand the rhythm of their lives, a rhythm dictated by the land itself. Slowly, imperceptibly, the dynamic began to shift. It started with the children. They were curious, as children always are, creeping closer to where he worked, watching him with wide, dark eyes. They threw stones near him, testing his reaction. Elias ignored them, continuing to repair a section of the corral fence. One afternoon, a small boy, no more than 6, sat crying near the stream. In his hands, he held a toy bow. The wood snapped in two. He looked at Elias with tragic devastation. Elias paused. He looked at the warriors. They were busy gambling with bone dice on the other side of the camp. He knelt down. "Let me see," Elias said softly. The boy recoiled, clutching the broken pieces. "I can fix it," Elias said. He mimed tying the pieces together. Hesitantly, the boy handed over the wood. Elias pulled a strip of rawhide from his pocket, scraps he had saved from his work. He sat in the dirt, his large hands moving with surprising delicacy. He splinted the break, wrapping the wet rawhide tight. As it dried, it would shrink and hold like iron. He handed it back. The boy stared at it, then at Elias. A smile, missing 2 front teeth, broke across his face. He ran off, whooping. A few days later, Elias was sitting by the fire in the evening, whittling a piece of driftwood. He began to whistle, a low, mournful tune, an old Irish ballad his mother had hummed a lifetime ago. The notes drifted through the quiet camp. He looked up to see 3 children sitting just at the edge of the firelight, listening. When he stopped, they whispered to each other. One imitated the sound, a sharp, piercing whistle. Elias chuckled. He whistled again, simpler this time. The children whistled back. It was a small thing, a tiny bridge built of melody. But it was there. The warriors were harder to win over. They ignored him or spat when he passed. But Elias knew horses, and he knew leather. One morning, he saw a warrior named Coda struggling with his saddle. The cinch strap was worn almost through, ready to snap at the first hard gallop. Coda was cursing, trying to knot it, which would only create a pressure point that would gall the horse. Elias walked over. "That will cut him," he said, pointing to the knot. Coda glared, his hand going to his knife. "Go away, white dog. If that snaps when you are riding, you fall. Maybe the horse breaks a leg." Coda hesitated. He looked at the strap. He knew Elias was right. Elias held out his hand. "Give me the awl and the sinew," reluctantly. Coda handed over the tools. Elias worked quickly. He cut out the bad section, spliced in a new piece of leather he had scavenged, and stitched it with a double locking stitch that would hold the weight of a bull. He smoothed the underside so it would not rub. He handed it back. Coda inspected it. He pulled on it with all his strength. It held. Coda looked at Elias. He did not smile. He did not say thank you. But he gave a short, sharp nod before turning to saddle his mount. It was enough. But not everyone was swayed. There was a young warrior, Taza, whose hatred was a living thing. Taza had lost his father and 2 brothers to the army. He watched Elias with the eyes of a predator waiting for the prey to stumble. The tension broke 3 weeks into Elias's captivity. He was at the stream, filling the water skins. Taza approached him, blocked his path. Taza was young, broad-shouldered, and reckless with grief. "You poison the water just by standing in it," Taza sneered in English. Elias stepped aside. "I am just doing my work. You should be dead. My brothers are dead. Why do you breathe?" Taza shoved Elias. Elias stumbled back, water sloshing from the skins. He did not fight back. He knew that if he struck an Apache warrior, he would be killed instantly by the others. "Coward!" Taza shouted. He drew his knife. "I will finish what the snake started." He lunged. Elias dropped the skins and dodged, the blade slicing the air inches from his chest. He caught Taza's wrist, using the boy's momentum to swing him around. But he did not strike. He merely held him. "Let him go." The voice cracked like a whip. Sani and Kaya were there, standing on the bank. Sani held a heavy stick used for grinding corn. Taza struggled, his face purple with rage. "He is an enemy! He is under the protection of the council!" Sani yelled. "He saved our sister. There is a debt. If you kill him, you insult the spirits. You dishonor Nalan." Taza looked at the sisters, then at Elias. He wrenched his arm free. He spat on the ground at Elias's feet. "The debt will be paid one day." Taza hissed, "And then I will cut your throat." He stormed off. Elias stood panting, his heart hammering. He looked at Sani. "Thank you," he said. Sani's face was stone. "I did not do it for you. I did it for the law. Do not mistake the two." But the dynamic had shifted again. They had defended him. One evening, the air was crisp and clear. The sky a vast dome of indigo scattered with stars so bright they looked like diamond dust. Nalan limped out of her wickiup. She was walking with a cane now. A sturdy branch Elias had smoothed for her. She found him by the corral, checking the hooves of the horses. He was alone. "Elias," she said. He straightened up, wiping his hands on his trousers. "Nalan, you are walking better. It heals," she said. She moved closer, leaning on the fence. The moonlight softened the sharp angles of her face. She looked at him, really looked at him, without the haze of fever or the immediate threat of death. "I have not thanked you," she said quietly. "Properly. For the water. For the wood. For the saddle. I am working off a debt." Elias said. "No." She shook her head. "You work harder than you have to. You fix the boy's toy. You do not complain when the food is scarce." Elias shrugged. "I've known hunger before." She studied his profile. He looked tired, but his eyes were clear. The haunted look she had seen in the wash was still there, but it was quieter now. "Why?" she asked suddenly. He looked at her. "Why what? Why did you save me? In the wash. You knew who I was. You knew what my people would do if you brought me here. Most white men would have ridden past. Some would have finished the snake's work. Elias looked up at the stars. He took a long time to answer. He took tobacco from his pocket and rolled a cigarette, his fingers moving with practiced ease. He offered it to her. She took it. He rolled another for himself. They smoked in silence for a moment. "I am tired of ghosts." "Nalin," he said finally. His voice was low, rasping like dry leaves. "I carried a rifle for the army for 3 years. I thought I was helping to make the land safe, but all I did was help dig graves. I saw villages burned. I saw women." He stopped, his voice catching. "I walked away." He continued. "But the ghosts followed. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the dead. When I saw you in the wash, I didn't see an Apache. I didn't see an enemy. I just saw someone who was going to die if I didn't do something. And I thought, maybe if I save one life, just one, the ghosts might let me sleep." He turned to look at her. His eyes were raw, open in a way a man's eyes rarely were in this hard country. It was selfish. "Maybe I did it for me as much as for you." Nalin listened. She felt a tightening in her chest, a strange ache that had nothing to do with her injury. She saw the man beneath the scars. She saw a mirror of her own grief. It was not selfish, she whispered. It was brave. She reached out, her hand hovering for a moment before lightly touching his forearm. Her fingers were warm. The touch sent a jolt through Elias that was stronger than whiskey. He looked at her hand, then up at her eyes. They stood there, suspended in the moment, the air charged with a sudden, terrifying intimacy. It was a recognition. Two broken people standing in the wreckage of a war they hadn't started, finding a common frequency. "You are a good man." "Elias," she said. A twig snapped. Nalin snatched her hand back. Elias spun around. Sani stepped out of the shadows. Her face was a mask of fury. She marched up to them, placing herself physically between Elias and Nalin. "Go to your bed, Nalin," Sani commanded. "But Sani, go!" Nalin looked at Elias, her eyes wide, then turned and limped away toward her wickiup. Sani turned on Elias. She was smaller than him, but she seemed to tower over him in her rage. "Do not think I do not see," she hissed. "See what?" Elias said, though his heart was pounding. "I see the way you look at her. I see the way she looks at you. Do you think because you saved her life, you own her?" "No," Elias said firmly. "I never thought that." "Good, because you are a white man. You are a ghost carrier. You have no place here. Do not mistake gratitude for love. Elias, and do not dare to think you can court an Apache woman." She stepped closer, her voice dropping to a lethal whisper. "If you ever speak of marriage, if you ever try to claim her, you will not just have to work. You will have to prove yourself worthy before the whole tribe. You will have to bleed. Do you understand?" "I understand," Elias said. Sani glared at him one last time, then turned and vanished into the dark. Elias stood alone by the corral. The word hung in the air. Marriage. He hadn't thought it. He hadn't allowed himself to think it. But now that Sani had said it, the idea took root in his mind with the tenacity of a mesquite tree. He thought of Nalin's hand on his arm. He thought of her fierce eyes, her strength, the way she smelled of sage and smoke. He went to his blanket, but he did not sleep. He lay awake, watching the stars wheel overhead, terrified by the realization that he didn't just want to save her. He wanted to be with her, and in this world, that was a desire that could get them both killed. 2 days later, the outside world came crashing back in. A scout returned from the perimeter. His horse frothed with sweat. He rode straight to the chief's wickiup. Within minutes, the camp was buzzing like a disturbed hive. The news spread quickly. Ranchers. Elias heard the men talking. A group of ranchers, led by a man named Harlan Pierce, had been seen near the mouth of the lower valley. They were with the local sheriff. They were surveying the water rights. They were claiming the grazing land that the Apache had used for generations. The tension in the camp thickened. It felt like the air before a thunderstorm. Heavy, electric, suffocating. The warriors began to paint their faces. The women began to pack the heavy items, preparing to run if they had to. Nayland found Elias by the stream. She looked worried. "They are coming closer," she said. "The ranchers. They want to push us out. I know the name Pierce," Elias said grimly. "He's a hard man. He thinks this land is his by divine right." "The elders are arguing," Nayland said. "Some want to fight. Some want to run deeper into the mountains." "What do you want?" Elias asked. "I want to stop running," she said, her voice fierce. "I want to live in peace. But men like Pierce—" "They do not know peace." Sani and Kaya approached them. They moved like storm clouds. "The white man knows these people," Sani said, looking at Elias with suspicion. "Perhaps he led them here." "I have been here every day," Elias said, his anger flaring. "I have worked. I have not left your sight." "Maybe," Kaya said, "but now we will see." Sani stepped close to Nayland, ignoring Elias. "Listen to me, sister," Sani said. "The danger is coming. When the bullets fly, a man shows his true heart. We will watch him. We will watch his choices." She looked at Elias, her eyes cold and challenging. "If he runs to his own kind, he is a traitor. If he hides, he is a coward. Only if he stands, only then is he a man." Nayland looked at Elias. The question was in her eyes, silent and pleading. "Who are you, really?" Elias looked back at her. He felt the weight of the moment settling on his shoulders. The time for hauling water was over. "I am not going anywhere," Elias said to the sisters. "We will see," Sani said. She turned and walked away, leaving Elias and Nayland standing in the gathering dusk, the wind rising around them, carrying the scent of dust and coming war. The dust signaled the return of the scouts long before the sound of their hoofbeats reached the canyon floor. It rose in a thin, choking pillar against the violet bruised sky of late afternoon, a warning flag that every soul in the camp knew how to read. By the time the three riders guided their blown horses down the scree slope and through the cottonwoods, the elders were already gathering by the central fire, their face set like stone. Elias Carter stood near the edge of the circle, his axe resting against a stump. He wiped sweat from his brow with a rag that was gray with grime. He had been splitting firewood for 4 hours, his back aching with a dull, rhythmic throb that he welcomed. Pain was simple. Pain was honest. What was happening in the council circle was neither. The lead scout, a scarred warrior named Chayton, slid from his horse. He did not look at his family. He looked straight at the chief. "They are at the river," Chayton said, his voice flat and carrying the weight of bad news. "How many?" the chief asked. 12 men, surveyors. They carry the brass instruments and the long chains. They are driving stakes into the earth. Soldiers, 4 bluecoats riding guard, but the rest are men from the town, ranchers, miners." A murmur went through the gathered crowd, a sound like dry leaves skittering over rock. Surveyors meant maps, maps meant claims, and claims meant that the white world had decided this canyon, this last refuge of water and shade, was no longer Apache land. It was property. Elias felt the eyes of the sisters, Sani and Kaya, boring into the side of his head. He kept his face forward, watching the fire. The council erupted into argument. It was not the chaotic shouting of a mob, but the deep, resonant disagreement of men who knew that every choice led to death. "We must move," one elder said, his hands shaping the air. "We go deeper into the Mogollon Rim. The winter snows will hide us, and starve us," another countered. "The game is scarce there. The children are already thin. If we run, we die slowly." "Then we fight," a young warrior shouted, striking his chest. "We go down to the river tonight. We cut their throats while they sleep. We burn their stakes, and bring the whole cavalry down on our heads," the chief said, his voice silencing the younger man. "If we kill surveyors, they will send a regiment. We are 30 fighting men. They are thousands." The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating in the heat. Elias stepped forward. He did not ask permission. He simply moved into the light of the fire. The warriors bristled, hands going to knives, but Nayland, sitting on a buffalo robe with her legs stretched out, raised a hand. "Let him speak," she said. Elias stopped a respectful distance from the chief. He took off his hat, holding it in both hands. "I know the men who sent those surveyors. Elias said. The chief looked at him. You know them? I know the town. Elias corrected himself. Banton. It is a cesspool of cattle money and bad whiskey, but the man driving those stakes is Harlan Pierce. A ripple of recognition went through the crowd. The name Pierce was known. It was a name spoken in curses. Pierce is not just a rancher. Elias continued, his voice steady. He is a man who believes he is doing God's work by clearing this land. He does not want the water for cattle alone. He wants the land empty. He has the local sheriff in his pocket, a man named Grady. Grady is weak. He drinks his courage from a bottle and does whatever Pierce pays him to do. And the soldiers? The chief asked. Captain Miller, Elias said. He commands the outpost near Banton. He is a by-the-book man. He cares nothing for justice, only for orders. If Pierce convinces him that you are a threat, Miller will ride against you without a second thought, but he will not act without cause. Sani stepped into the circle, her face twisted in a sneer. He speaks of them as if they are his brothers, she said, spitting on the ground near Elias's boots. He seeks to protect them. He wants us to be afraid so we will run, and his people can take the water. I'm telling you how they think, Elias said, turning to face her. If you attack the surveyors, you give Pierce exactly what he wants. He wants a massacre. He wants a reason to demand the army wipe you out. If you kill those men, you sign the death warrant for every child in this camp. Sani glared at him, but she did not speak. The truth of his words hung in the air, bitter and undeniable. Then what do we do? The chief asked. We need to know what they are planning, Elias said. We need to know if the army is truly backing Pierce, or if he is bluffing. We need to know when they plan to move. We send scouts, Chayton said. Scouts can watch the river. Elias said. They cannot walk into the saloon. They cannot read the posters on the sheriff's wall. You need eyes inside the town. I will go, Nolan said. The camp turned to her. She struggled to stand, using her cane, her face pale but determined. You are wounded, Kaya said, moving to support her. You cannot walk the distance. I can ride, Nolan said. I speak their tongue. I know how they look at us. They see a woman with a limp. They see a beggar. They do not see a spy. I can go into the town. I can listen. It is too dangerous, the chief said. It is survival, Nolan insisted. And I will take him. She pointed at Elias. The sisters gasped. You would take the wolf into the fold, Sani demanded. He will betray us the moment he sees the town lights. He will not, Nolan said, her eyes locking with Elias's. He will translate what is written. He will be my shield if the words turn to stones. The chief looked at Elias. If you run, I won't run, Elias said. If you betray her, I won't betray her. The chief nodded slowly. Then you go. But you do not go alone. 2 warriors will ride with you. They will watch you. If you make one move to alert the soldiers, you will not hit the ground alive. The journey to Banton took 2 days. It was a grueling trek through a landscape that seemed determined to scrub the life from anything that dared cross it. They rode through scrub oak and catclaw acacia, across dry washes where the heat radiated up from the white stones like a physical blow. Elias rode his mare, his hands tied loosely to the saddle horn, a symbolic restraint, but a restraint nonetheless. The 2 warriors, Taza and a quiet older man named Bidal, rode behind him with rifles resting across their laps. Nolan rode beside Elias. She wore a heavy cloak of rough wool despite the heat. The hood pulled up to shadow her face. She had rubbed dust into her skin to darken it further, and she wore the cast-off boots of a white miner that were too big for her. She looked like one of the many destitute drifters who haunted the edges of the frontier towns. The silence between them was long, filled only by the creak of leather and the steady crunch of hooves on gravel. But it was not an empty silence. It was charged with the memory of the night by the corral, the almost touch that had been interrupted. On the second afternoon, as they stopped to water the horses at a muddy seep, Elias moved to help Nayland down. She waved him off, sliding from the saddle with a wince as her bad leg took her weight. You should rest it more, Elias said quietly, offering her his canteen. There is no rest, Nolan said. Taking the water. Not until we know. They sat in the shade of a mesquite bush, eating strips of dried venison. The warriors sat 10 feet away, watching. Do you ever imagine it? Elias asked, looking out at the shimmering horizon. Imagine what? A life without the looking back. A life where you don't have to sleep with a knife in your hand. Naylin chewed slowly. She looked at the mountains, purple in the distance. Fear is like the wind here, she said. It is always blowing. Sometimes it is a gale, sometimes just a breeze, but it is always there. To imagine life without it. It is like imagining the sky without the sun. I imagine it, Elias said. I imagine a cabin with a porch, a field of corn that isn't burned, silence that isn't waiting for a gunshot. Naylin looked at him. Her dark eyes searched his face, seeing the lines of fatigue and the old, deep sadness that lived in the corners of his mouth. And who is in this cabin? She asked softly. Elias held her gaze. He did not look away. Just me, he said, though the lie tasted like ash. And maybe someone who is tired of running. Naylin looked down at her hands. The moment stretched, fragile as spun glass. That night, they made a cold camp in a dry arroyo to avoid being seen. The air turned biting cold as soon as the sun vanished. They did not risk a large fire, only a small flicker of flames in a dugout pit to boil coffee. Taza and Bedal took the first watch, sitting up on the rim of the wash. Elias and Ellen sat by the dying coals. Nalin shivered, drawing her cloak tighter. The wind was cutting down the channel, carrying the chill of the high desert. Here, Elias said. He unbuttoned his canvas coat. No, she said. You will freeze. I'm used to it. Take it. He draped the heavy coat over her shoulders. She did not push it away. She pulled it around herself, and the warmth of his body was still trapped in the lining. It smelled of tobacco, horse, and him. It was a scent that made her heart hammer a strange, erratic rhythm against her ribs. She shifted closer to him, seeking the heat, her shoulder pressed against his arm. Elias went still. He did not pull away. He leaned into the touch, a microscopic movement that felt like a shout in the silence. They sat there for a long time, watching the embers glow red and fade to gray. Why do you stay? Naylin whispered. You could have ridden for the town the moment we left the canyon. Taza and Bedal are good warriors, but you know this land better. You could have escaped. Elias looked at her. The firelight caught the planes of her face, the high cheekbones, the depth of her eyes. I told you, he said, his voice rough. I owe a debt. Is that all? She asked. Elias turned to her. His face was inches from hers. He could see the pulse beating in the hollow of her throat. No, he said, that is not all. He wanted to say more. The words were there, crowding his throat, words about redemption, about hope, about the way the world seemed to narrow down to just her when she was near, but the weight of the two warriors on the rim, and the weight of the history between them, held him back. Naylin looked at his lips. She saw the hunger there, and the restraint. She felt a answering pull in her own blood, a desire to lean across the inches and find out if peace could be found in the arms of an enemy. Sleep, Elias said, his voice breaking the spell. We have a long ride tomorrow. Naylin nodded. She lay down, pulling his coat up to her chin. She watched him sitting vigil over the coals, a dark silhouette against the stars, and she knew, with a terrifying certainty, that she was falling in love with him. They reached Benton at noon the next day. They left the horses and the warriors in a box canyon a mile out. Naylin and Elias walked in alone. The town was a scar on the land, 2 rows of hastily built wooden structures flanking a street of churned mud and manure. The air smelled of raw lumber, stale beer, and unwashed bodies. It was loud. Hammers rang against anvils. Wagons rattled. Men shouted. Naylin walked with her head down, limping heavily on her cane. She kept the hood of her cloak pulled forward. Elias walked beside her, his hat pulled low. He felt exposed without his gun, naked in a town where every second man wore a pistol on his hip. They passed the general store. In the window, a hand-painted sign read, "No dogs, no Indians." Nalin stopped. She stared at the sign. Her hand tightened on her cane until her knuckles were white. "Keep moving," Elias murmured, touching her elbow. "Don't look at it." They walked past men loitering on the boardwalks. "Look at that." A miner spat as they passed. Another blanket head begging for whiskey. They ought to round 'em all up and shoot 'em. Another man laughed. "Save the government the feed money." Elias felt a heat rising in his chest, a dark, suffocating rage. He saw Nayland's shoulders hunch, making herself smaller, absorbing the hatred as if she expected it. It shamed him. It shamed him that this was his people. It shamed him that he had once worn the uniform that protected this. They reached the saloon, a sprawling building with swinging doors and the tinny sound of a piano drifting out. "Wait here," Elias said. "Stand in the shadow of the water trough. Keep your head down. I am coming in," Nayland whispered. "No. If they see you in there, they'll throw you out or worse. I need to get close to the bar. I need to hear." Nayland hesitated, then nodded. She moved into the narrow alleyway between the saloon and the barber shop. Pulling her cloak tight, Elias pushed through the doors. The saloon was dim and smoky. Men stood 3 deep at the bar. He saw Harlan Pierce immediately. Pierce was a big man, broad as a barn door, wearing a suit that cost more than Elias made in 5 years. He was holding court at a corner table, a bottle of good whiskey in front of him. Sheriff Grady sat opposite him, looking nervous and sweating into his collar. Elias moved to the end of the bar. Ordering a beer, he nursed it, turning his back to the room. Straining his ears, "Captain is hesitant," Grady was saying. "He needs provocation. Harlan, provocation is easy." Pierce's voice boomed. He wasn't even trying to whisper. "I've got boys ready to ride. We'll cut a few fences. Maybe burn a shed or 2. Blame it on the Apaches. Miller will have to act." "But a search party?" Grady asked. "We call it a search party." Pierce laughed. "But we're going hunting. Sheriff, we know they're in the canyon. We go in, we scatter them. If a few get shot resisting arrest, well, that's just the hazard of the frontier." Elias gripped his glass. His knuckles turned white. It was a setup. A sanctioned slaughter. He had heard enough. He needed to get Nayland and leave. He turned to go. As he pushed back through the swinging doors, he heard a commotion on the street. "Hey, let's see what's under that blanket." "Sweetheart." Elias' blood ran cold. He stepped onto the boardwalk. 3 cowboys, stinking of drunk sweat and cattle, had cornered Nayland near the water trough. One of them, a lanky man with a wandering eye, had grabbed the edge of her cloak. "Leave me," Nayland said, her voice low and trembling. "Oh, she speaks English." The cowboy laughed. "Come on, squaw, give us a smile." He yanked the cloak. Nayland stumbled back, her cane slipping. She fell hard against the trough. Elias didn't think. He didn't calculate the odds. He moved. He crossed the boardwalk in 2 strides and vaulted the railing. He hit the street running. He grabbed the cowboy by the shoulder, spun him around, and drove his fist into the man's jaw. There was a sickening crack. The cowboy crumpled like a sack of grain. The other 2 men stared for a second, then roared. "Indian lover," one screamed. They rushed him. Elias ducked a wild swing and landed a solid punch to the second man's gut, doubling him over. But the third man was fast. He slammed a heavy boot into Elias's knee. Elias went down. They were on him instantly. Boots kicked at his ribs, his head, his back. He curled into a ball, trying to protect his face, but the blows were relentless. He tasted blood, hot and copper sharp. The world spun in a kaleidoscope of dust and pain. "Get him!" Someone from the boardwalk cheered. "Teach the traitor a lesson!" Elias lashed out, catching a leg, tripping one of the attackers. He tried to rise, but a boot heel caught him square in the temple. Darkness flared at the edge of his vision. "Stop!" Nayland screamed. She swung her heavy oak cane with both hands. It cracked against the shoulder of the man kicking Elias. He yelped and spun around. "You!" Before he could grab her, the sound of a shotgun being racked echoed through the street. "That's enough!" The bartender stood on the porch, a double-barreled shotgun leveled at the street. "Take your fight out of town, boys, or I'll blow you to hell." The cowboys backed off, breathing hard. glaring at Elias. "You better run." "Lover," the lanky one spat, spitting blood. "Before we come back with a rope." Naylin was at Ella's side. Her hands were shaking, but her grip was iron. "Up," she whispered. "Get up. We must move." Elias groaned. Every inch of him was screaming. He grabbed her arm and hauled himself up. He swayed, the world tilting dangerously. "Come," she said. She led him away, half dragging him into the shadows of the alleyway. They moved deeper into the maze of back streets, away from the jeers and the laughter. They collapsed behind a stack of crates in a narrow passage between a livery stable and a warehouse. It was dark, smelling of hay and manure, but they were hidden. Elias slid down the wall, his head thumping back against the wood. He coughed, and pain flared in his ribs. "You are a fool," Naylin hissed. She was tearing a strip from the hem of her dress. "I know," Elias wheezed. She poured water from his canteen onto the cloth. She knelt between his legs, wiping the blood from his split lip and the gash over his eye. Her hands were gentle, impossibly gentle, but he could feel the tremors of rage running through her. "Why?" she demanded, pressing the cloth to his forehead. "They were 3. You were 1. You have no gun. Why did you fight?" Elias opened his one good eye. He looked at her. Her hood had fallen back. Her hair was loose, framing a face that was fierce and terrified and beautiful. "Because he touched you," Elias whispered. Naylin froze, her hand stilled on his face. "I couldn't watch it," Elias said. "I couldn't stand by. Not again." Naylin stared at him. The anger in her eyes dissolved into something else, something raw and overwhelming. She saw the bruises blooming on his skin. She saw the blood on his shirt. And she knew, in that moment, that this man would die for her. Not for a debt, not for guilt, but for her. "You are a fool," she said again. But the word was a caress. She leaned in. Her face was inches from his. He could feel her breath on his cheek, warm and sweet. The sounds of the town faded. The pain in his body faded. There was only her, Elias. She breathed. He lifted his hand, his fingers grazing her jaw. "Naylin." She leaned closer. Their lips were a breath apart. The heat between them was a physical force, a magnetic pull that defied the hatred of the world around them. Elias closed his eyes, leaning into the promise of her. "Hey, did they go down here?" A voice from the street, heavy boots crunching on gravel. Naylin jerked back. The moment shattered. "We have to go," she whispered, fear flooding back into her eyes. "Now?" The journey back to the canyon was a blur of pain and urgency. Elias rode slumped in the saddle, Naylin constantly checking on him. When they finally reached the safety of the cottonwoods, Elias was nearly falling off his horse. They went straight to the council fire. Elias refused the medicine man's help until he spoke. "Pierce is coming," he rasped, standing before the elders, swaying slightly. "He calls it a search party. It is a raid. He plans to provoke you, then bring the army." The camp exploded into activity. The debate was over. Now, there was only preparation. Sani and Kaya took charge of the defenses. Naylin helped Elias to his designated sleeping spot. She brought him water and willow bark tea for the pain. "Rest," she told him. "You have done enough." But there was no rest. The camp was packing to move. The decision had been made to retreat deeper into the mountains at dawn. Elias's gear, his saddlebags, his bedroll, had been tossed near the fire by the warriors who had stripped the horses. Naylin went to gather them. She picked up his saddlebag. The leather was old and cracked. As she lifted it, the buckle, loosened by the rough travel, gave way. The contents spilled onto the dirt. Spare cartridges, a whetstone, a small tin of tobacco, and a folded oilskin packet. Naylin knelt to gather the items. The oilskin packet had fallen open. A map slid out. It was an army map. Official survey. The paper was thick, creamy, covered in precise black lines and topographical markings. Naylin picked it up. She didn't mean to pry, but her eyes caught a familiar shape, the winding curve of a river, the jagged line of a ridge. It was the map of the Salt River Campaign. She looked closer. There were markings in red ink. X's marking encampments. Arrows showing troop movements. Dates. Her finger traced a line. August 12th, 1872. The red line moved up a box canyon. It circled a location. Target, winter camp. Nayland's blood turned to ice. The world seemed to stop spinning. August 12th, 1872. She remembered the heat of that day. She remembered the smell of the corn roasting. She remembered the sound of the bugle. That was the day her father died. That was the day her childhood ended. And the handwriting on the map. The careful, precise notes in the margins. Scout report confirms access via North Ridge. She looked at the bottom corner. Scout E. Carter. A scream built in her throat. A sound of pure, agonized betrayal. She stood up, the map clutched in her hand. She walked to where Elias was sitting, drinking the tea. He looked up as she approached. He smiled, a bruised, weary smile. "Nayland." "Hi, liar!" she screamed. The sound tore through the camp. Everyone stopped. Sani and Kaya came running. Nayland threw the map at his chest. It fluttered to the ground, damning and white against the red dirt. Elias looked at the map. His face drained of all color. He looked like a man who had been shot in the gut. "Nayland," he whispered. "You were there." Nayland shrieked, pointing at him, tears streaming down her face. "You led them! The Salt River! You led them to the winter camp!" Elias stood up slowly. He did not deny it. He could not. "I was a scout," he said, his voice hollow. "I told you. You did not tell me this. You did not tell me you were the one who showed them the path. You did not tell me you drew the map that killed my father." The camp was silent. The warriors moved in, their face dark with murder. "I didn't know it was your family," Elias said, his voice cracking. "I didn't know until I saw the scars on the chief, until I heard the stories. But you knew when you saved me. You knew when you sat by my fire." "Yes," Elias whispered. "I knew." Nayland stared at him. The love that had been blooming in her heart an hour ago curdled into a black, oily hate. She felt sick. She felt violated. She had let him touch her. She had almost kissed the man who had guided the bullet to her father's heart. "Get away from me," she choked out. "Nayland, please." "Do not speak my name," she screamed. "You are death. You are nothing but death." She turned away, sobbing, collapsing into Kaya's arms. Sani stepped forward. She picked up the map. She looked at it, then at Elias. Her eyes were not angry. They were something worse. They were final. "You brought ghosts to our door, white man," Sani said quietly. "You have eaten our food. You have breathed our air. And all this time, you had our blood on your hands." "I have tried to pay it back," Elias said, tears cutting tracks through the dust on his face. "I have tried. Blood does not wash away with water," Sani said. The warriors stepped forward, knives drawn. Taza looked ready to carve Elias into pieces. "No," Sani said. "Stop." She looked at Nayland, who was weeping in the dust. Then she looked at Elias. "Killing you is too easy," Sani said, "and it will not bring our father back." She stepped close to Elias. "You want to pay the debt? You want to be worthy of her? I will do anything," Elias said. "Then you do not get to die," Sani hissed. "You get to bleed. You get to suffer. If you ever want to stand within a mile of my sister again, you must do more than haul water. You must risk everything." She pointed to the darkness beyond the canyon. "The raid is coming. If you are truly not that man anymore, then you will be the shield that breaks first. Now get out of my sight." Elias looked at Nayland one last time. She did not look up. He turned and walked into the shadows, alone, carrying a weight heavier than any map, heavier than any gun. He carried the truth, and in the silence of the canyon, the ghosts of the past finally caught up with him. The silence in the canyon was heavier than the stones that lined the creek bed. It was a suffocating, dense weight that pressed against the chest and made breathing a labor. Elias Carter moved through the camp like a phantom, a man who had ceased to exist in the eyes of the people around him, yet whose presence was the grit in their collective eye. He carried a heavy pack of buffalo hide toward the line of waiting horses. His head bowed. No one spoke to him. When he passed near the cooking fires, the women turned their backs. pulling their shawls tight as if his shadow cast a chill. When he walked by the warriors, hands drifted to knife hilts, fingers twitching with the urge to open his throat and let the bad blood spill out into the dust. The map. The damned map. It had changed him from a curiosity, a useful tool, into a monster. He was no longer the man who had saved Nolan from the snake. He was the scout. The betrayal was etched into his skin, visible to everyone. Nalan was working near the wickiup of her sister. Sani, she was lashing a bundle of dried corn to a travois. Her movements were sharp, angry, and brittle. She looked thinner than she had 2 days ago, her eyes hollowed out by sleeplessness and the acid taste of heartbreak. Elias paused, 20 feet away, watching her. He wanted to speak. He wanted to say that a man is not the ink on a page, that 10 years is a lifetime, that he would cut off his own hand if it would undo the lines he had drawn on that survey paper. But he said nothing. Nalan did not look up. She tied the knot with a savage force, the leather biting into the wood, and turned her shoulder to him, shutting him out as effectively as a slammed door. The camp was moving. The decision had been made in the dark hours of the morning. They would go higher, deep into the fastness of the Sierra Madre, where the air was thin and the game was scarce, but where the white men with their chains and their deeds could not easily follow. It was a retreat born of desperation. The sky above was a vast, blinding sheet of polished tin. The sun beat down, indifferent and cruel. The wind kicked up, swirling dust devils that danced across the canyon floor like restless spirits. Every gust felt like a warning, a whisper that time had run out. Elias secured the pack on a paint pony and wiped the sweat from his eyes. He scanned the horizon, a habit he could never break. He saw the dust first. It was not the thin, spiraling dust of the wind. It was a low, brown cloud, thick and purposeful, rising from the mouth of the canyon. "Dust," Elias said. The word was not loud, but in the tense silence, it carried like a gunshot. Taza, the young warrior who hated him most, looked up. He sneered. "It is the wind, white coward." "No," Elias said, his voice hardening. "It is horses, shod horses, many of them." The ground began to tremble. A moment later, the sound reached them, the heavy, rhythmic thunder of a gallop. "Riders!" A sentry on the ridge screamed, his voice cracking with panic. "They are here!" The camp exploded into chaos. Mothers grabbed children. Warriors scrambled for their rifles. The horses in the corral screamed and reared, smelling the fear. Elias ran toward the perimeter, ignoring the glares. He scrambled up a pile of fallen boulders to get a vantage point. They were coming fast, a column of 30 men. At the front rode Harlan Pierce, big and dark on a chestnut stallion, his long duster coat flapping behind him like the wings of a crow. Beside him rode Sheriff Grady, and flanking them were 6 uniformed soldiers, looking uncomfortable and dusty. Behind them was a ragtag posse of ranch hands and hired guns, men with hard faces and loose morals. They did not slow down. They did not come to parley. "Get to the rocks," Elias shouted, turning back to the camp. "Don't stand in the open! They are here to talk!" An elder shouted back, holding up a peace talisman. "They bring the soldiers. They are not here to talk!" Elias roared, sliding down the rocks. "Look at their hands! Guns are drawn!" The lead riders burst into the clearing. Harlan Pierce didn't hesitate. He raised a heavy buffalo rifle and fired into the air, the boom echoing off the canyon walls like doom itself. "This land is claimed by the territory of Arizona," Pierce bellowed, his voice struggling over the noise of hooves. "You are trespassing. Move or be moved." Before the echo died, a shot rang out from the posse, a nervous trigger finger or pure malice. It didn't matter. The bullet struck a cooking pot, sending it clanging into the fire. That was the spark. An Apache arrow flew from the brush, striking a rancher in the shoulder. The man screamed, and the world dissolved into gunfire. The canyon became a kill box. The posse fanned out, firing indiscriminately into the wickiups. Bullets tore through canvas and flesh. Elias threw himself behind a fallen log as the dirt erupted around him. He saw Taza standing in the open, trying to notch an arrow. A perfect target. "Move, you fool!" Elias shouted. He lunged, grabbing Taza's ankle and dragging him down just as a spray of buckshot shredded the air where the boy's head had been. Taza looked at him, eyes wide with shock, but Elias was already moving, crawling toward a better position. "Keep low," Elias yelled in English, then switched to the few Apache words he knew. "Naguno, Enju, go down." He saw Nalin. She was near the stream, her cane forgotten, trying to herd 3 terrified children toward a crevice in the rock wall. A rider, one of Pierce's hired thugs, spurred his horse toward them, swinging a lasso. Elias raised his head. He didn't have a gun. They had taken his Winchester days ago. He grabbed a stone the size of a grapefruit. He stood up, exposing himself to the fire. "Hey!" he screamed. The rider turned. Elias hurled the stone with all the strength in his scarred back. It struck the rider in the temple. The man slumped, sliding sideways from the saddle. Nalin looked up. She saw Elias standing amidst the whiz of bullets, weaponless, drawing fire to save them. For a split second, their eyes met, a connection of pure terror and recognition. Then she shoved the children into the crevice and threw herself in after them. The battle was brutal and short. The Apache were outgunned and caught unprepared. The soldiers, to their credit, fired mostly over the heads of the fleeing women. But Pierce's men had no such scruples. Old Kitchie, the storyteller who had held the history of the band in his mind, stumbled out of a burning wickiup. A bullet from a repeater caught him in the chest. He fell slowly, clutching the earth he loved, his white hair fanning out in the red dust. "No!" The scream tore from Nalin's throat. She was scrambling out of the crevice, her eyes fixed on something near the corral. Her little cousin, a boy of 7 named Chivato, had been cut off. He was running, crying, trying to reach his mother. "Chivato, run!" Nalin screamed. A rider swooped down. It was a man with a red beard, laughing. He didn't shoot the boy. He leaned down, his arm sweeping out like a hook. He grabbed the back of the boy's shirt and hauled him up onto the saddle. "Got one!" the man yelled. Another rider grabbed a teenage girl, dragging her kicking and screaming across the pommel of his saddle. A third man snatched a baby from a cradle board, dropped in the panic. "Let them go!" Elias roared. He charged the red-bearded man. Grabbing at the horse's bridle, the rider kicked out, his heavy boot catching Elias square in the chest. Elias flew backward, the wind knocked out of him, landing hard in the dirt. He gasped, trying to rise, but the world was spinning. "That's enough." Captain Miller's voice cut through the din. "Fall back! We have cleared the area! Fall back!" It was a lie. They hadn't cleared anything. They had raided. They had stolen. Pierce signaled his men. They turned their horses, firing a last volley to keep the warriors' heads down. With the weeping children draped over their saddles, they thundered back down the canyon, leaving dust and death in their wake. The silence that followed was worse than the noise. It was a silence filled with the crackle of burning brush and the low, keening wail of a mother who had lost her child. Elias lay in the dirt, clutching his bruised ribs. He coughed, spitting bloody saliva. He pushed himself up to his knees. The camp was a ruin. 3 bodies lay on the ground. Old Kitchie, a woman named Asala, and a warrior Elias didn't know well. Nalin was kneeling in the dust where Chivato had been taken. She was rocking back and forth, her hands clutching the air, her face a mask of absolute devastation. Elias tried to stand. He took a step toward her. "Nalin." A hand struck him from behind. He went down again. Taza was standing over him, his face twisted with grief and fury. He held a war club. "You!" Taza screamed. "You brought them!" He kicked Elias in the stomach. Elias curled up, wheezing. "Spy! Traitor! You told them when to come! You told them we were weak!" Another warrior joined in, raining blows down on Elias's back and shoulders. The grief of the camp needed a target, and Elias was there. He was white. He was the enemy. He was the map maker. Elias did not fight back. He covered his head with his arms and took it. Maybe Taza was right. Maybe his presence was a curse. Maybe the map he had drawn 10 years ago had cursed this ground forever. "Kill him," a woman shrieked. "Cut his heart out. Taza raised the club for a killing blow. "Stop!" The command was not loud, but it had the weight of iron. Chief Cochise stood nearby, bleeding from a graze on his arm. He held a rifle. "Stop!" the chief said again. "He is a dog!" Taza yelled, tears streaking his face. "He killed Kitchi. He gave our children to the White Devil. He fought." The chief said, "I saw him." "He pulled you from the bullet's path. Taza. He stoned a rider to save Nalin. He is pretending." "Enough!" the chief roared. "We have enough dead to bury today. Do not add to it with murder. Tie him up. We will decide his fate when the mourning is done." Taza lowered the club, spitting on Elias one last time. He grabbed Elias by the collar and dragged him toward a cottonwood tree. They bound his hands behind his back with rawhide, tight enough to cut circulation, and left him there in the dust. The sun began to set, turning the blood on the ground black. Elias sat against the tree, his body a map of pain. He watched the Apache mourn. He watched them wrap the bodies. He watched the mother of the stolen baby cut her hair off with a knife, wailing at the sky. He looked for Nalin. She was sitting by the fire, staring into the flames. She looked shattered. The fierce, vibrant woman who had survived a snake bite was gone. In her place was something brittle, something that looked ready to turn to dust. She felt his gaze. She looked up. Her eyes were dry now, and cold. She looked at his bruised face, the blood matting his hair. She remembered him leaping in front of the rider. She remembered him dragging Taza down. But then she remembered the map. She remembered the red line leading to her father's death. She looked away. Hours passed. The moon rose, indifferent and white. Sani and Kaya approached the tree. They moved like ghosts. Sani held a knife. Elias tensed. He wondered if this was it, if they had come to finish what Taza started. Sani knelt. She did not cut his throat. She cut the rawhide binding his hands. "Get up," she whispered. Elias struggled to his feet. His legs were stiff. He swayed, and Kaya put a hand on his arm to steady him. Her touch was not gentle, but it wasn't violent either. "Come," Sani said. They led him away from the main fire, into the shadows of the cliff face. Nalin was there, standing with her back to the stone. She did not look at him. "You are still alive." "White man," Sani said, her voice low. "Because the chief is wise," Elias rasped. "Because we need you," Sani corrected. Elias wiped blood from his mouth. "Need me? You hate me." "Yes," Sani said simply. "We hate what you were. We hate what you brought. But hate does not bring back children." She stepped closer, her dark eyes boring into his. "Harlan Pierce has them. He has taken them to his ranch, or to the town. He will sell them, or keep them as servants. He thinks he has won. He thinks we are broken." "What do you want me to do?" Elias asked. Sani pointed south. "You know him. You know his ranch. You know the white man's world. We cannot ride into Banton without starting a war that will kill every one of us. But a small group, a group led by a man who knows the trails, who knows how to talk to soldiers. You want me to lead a rescue," Elias said. "I want you to bring them back," Sani said. She looked at Nalin, then back to Elias. "You said you wanted to pay your debt. You said you wanted to be worthy. Words are wind." "Elias, blood is heavy. This is a suicide mission," Elias said. "Pierce will have guards. The army is nearby." "Yes," Kaya said. "It is likely you will die." "And if I die?" Elias asked. "Then you die doing something right," Sani said. "And maybe, if the spirits are kind, you will wash some of the red from your soul before you go." Elias looked at Nalin. She was finally looking at him. Her face was unreadable, a mask of pain and conflict. "Why should I trust you?" Nalin asked, her voice cracking. "You drew the map." Elias took a step toward her. He ignored the sisters. "I drew the map," he said softly. "I cannot change that. I cannot bring your father back. I cannot bring Kitchi back." He looked down at his hands, then back at her. "But I can bring Chivato. I can bring the girl. Or I can die trying. And right now, dying for something that matters sounds a hell of a lot better than living with what I am." Nayland searched his face. She saw the bruises. She saw the exhaustion. But she also saw the steel that had kept him alive in the desert. She saw the man who had sucked poison from her leg. "Do it," she whispered. Elias turned back to Sani. "When do we leave?" "Now," Sani said, "before the trails fade. Taza will go with you. And Bidal." "I go too," Nalan said. "No," Sani said. "You're injured." "I go," Nalan said, her voice rising. "Chivato is my blood, and I will not sit here and wait for a white man to save him. I go to make sure he does not fail." Sani looked at her sister. She saw the set of Nalan's jaw. She nodded. "Then you go." The preparation was fast and silent. They took only what they could carry. Elias was given a knife, but no gun. Sani handed it to him, handle first. "If you betray us," she said, "Taza will put an arrow in your back." "I know," Elias said. They slipped out of the canyon like shadows. 5 of them. Elias, Nalan, Taza, Bidal, and a young tracker named Hami. They moved on foot to avoid the noise of horses until they were clear of the valley, then circled back to where the Apache herd had been scattered. They managed to catch 4 horses in the dark. They rode south, following the wide, trampled trail of Pierce's posse. The days that followed were a blur of punishment. The land seemed to turn against them. The trail led through the worst of the Badlands, jagged fields of volcanic rock that tore at the horses' hooves, dry alkali flats that cracked lips and blinded eyes. They rode hard, sleeping only 4 hours a night. They ate jerky and parched corn. Elias rode at the front. He tracked with a focus that bordered on obsession. When the trail was lost on stone, he found a crushed piece of sagebrush or a scrape of metal on rock. He pushed himself harder than the horses. He didn't speak unless necessary. Taza watched him constantly. The young warrior's hatred had not cooled, but it had turned into a grim respect for Elias's endurance. Elias gave his water to the horses. Elias took the last watch. Elias walked when his horse went lame, refusing to slow them down. On the 3rd day, Hami fell. His horse stepped in a badger hole and went down, rolling over the rider. Hami's leg was snapped. They stopped. There was no way he could continue. They left him with water and a rifle in the shade of a rock overhang, promising to return. The mood of the group darkened. They were fewer now. That afternoon, the weather turned. The sky, which had been a relentless blue furnace, suddenly bruised purple. Clouds boiled up over the Superstition Mountains, thick and violent. The temperature dropped 20 degrees in an hour. "Storm," Elias warned, shouting over the rising wind. "A bad one. We need cover." They were in a labyrinth of slot canyons. The wind shrieked through the narrow stone walls. Rain began to fall, not in drops, but in sheets. Lightning cracked, turning the world blinding white, followed instantly by thunder that shook the ground. "Flash flood!" Bidal screamed. "Get to high ground!" A wall of water was coming down the wash. They scrambled up the slick rock slopes, dragging the terrified horses. In the chaos, the group was split. Taza and Bidal went up the left face. Elias and Nalan were forced up a narrow fissure to the right. The water hit the canyon floor with a roar like a freight train, a churning slurry of mud, boulders, and uprooted trees. It cut them off completely. "Up!" Elias yelled, shoving Nalan ahead of him. "There's an overhang." They scrambled over wet, slick rock, slipping and clawing until they collapsed into a shallow cave, barely 10 feet deep, carved into the cliff face. They huddled there, gasping for breath, soaked to the skin. Outside, the world was ending. The rain fell in a solid curtain, blurring the canyon into gray static. The lightning was constant, strobing the cave with harsh, flickering light. They were trapped. Elias leaned back against the stone, shivering violently. His shirt was plastered to his skin. His bruises ached with a deep, throbbing rhythm. Nalan sat opposite him, her knees drawn to her chest. Her hair hung in wet strands around her face. She was shaking too. They sat in silence for a long time, listening to the roar of the flood below. "Are they safe?" Nalan asked, her voice small against the thunder. "Taza and Bidal? They made the high ledge." Elias said, "They are safe. We just have to wait for the water to drop." Nalan looked at him. In the flash of lightning, he looked like a drowned rat. He looked pathetic, and he looked unbreakable. "You gave your blanket to Hami," she said. "He needed it," Elias said, his teeth chattering. "You are freezing. I'm fine. You are a liar." "Elias Carter." She moved. She crawled across the small space between them. "We must share heat," she said, "or the sickness will take us." Elias stiffened. "Nalin." "Do not speak," she said sharply. "This is survival. It means nothing." She sat beside him and pulled his arm around her. She pressed her side against his. The contact was electric. Even through the wet clothes, the heat of her body was shocking. Elias felt his heart hammering against his ribs, loud enough to drown out the thunder. He hesitated, then wrapped his coat, what was left of it, around both of them. He pulled her closer. They sat huddled together in the dark, the storm raging inches away. The anger was still there, sitting between them like a stone. The map, the betrayal, the dead father. But the heat was there too, the memory of the almost kiss in the alley, the undeniable pull of two people who had seen the worst of the world and found the only comfort in each other. "Why?" Nalin whispered into his shoulder after a long time. "Why what? Why did you keep the map? If it was such a shame to you, why did you keep it?" Elias closed his eyes. He rested his chin on the top of her wet head. "To remember," he whispered. "So I would never forget what I did. So I would never think I was innocent." Nalin went still. She listened to the beat of his heart. She hated him. She loved him. The two feelings twisted together, a knot she could not untie. "You are a fool," she murmured. She turned her face into his neck. Her breath was warm on his skin. Elias tightened his arm around her. He knew he should pull away. He knew he had no right to hold her. But the night was cold, and the death waiting for them at Harlan's ranch was very real. For tonight, in the storm, he would be a fool, he would be warm, and he would hold the woman he loved, even if she could never forgive him. The storm outside was a physical weight, a crushing presence that turned the small stone overhang into a tomb of noise and cold. The rain fell in sheets so thick they looked like solid gray walls, and the thunder did not roll. It detonated, shaking the limestone beneath them until Elias felt the vibrations in his own teeth. Inside the shallow cave, the air was freezing. Elias Carter sat with his back against the rough stone, his legs drawn up. Beside him, Nalin was a dark shape in the gloom, shivering with a violence that rattled her jaw. The woolen coat Elias had wrapped around them was soaked through, heavy and smelling of wet dog and old dust. But it was the only barrier between them and hypothermia. They were pressed together from hip to shoulder, not out of affection, but out of a desperate, primal need to share heat. Yet, despite the physical intimacy, a canyon of silence lay between them. The revelation of the map, the betrayal of his past, still hung in the damp air like smoke. Elias stared out at the deluge. He could feel Nalin's shoulder trembling against his arm. He wanted to reach out, to rub the warmth back into her arms, but he kept his hands clenched in his lap. He had lost the right to touch her. It was Nalin who broke the silence. Her voice was thin, barely audible over the drumming of the rain. "I was 12, she said. Elias turned his head slightly. She was looking at the ground, her wet hair plastering her cheek. "The day he died," she continued, her voice trembling not just from cold, but from the memory. "It was harvest time. We were roasting corn. The air smelled sweet. I loved that smell." She took a shuddering breath. Then the bugle sounded. I didn't know what it was. My father pushed me into the storage pit and covered it with a woven mat. He told me to be quiet as a mouse. I lay there in the dark, smelling the corn and the dust. And then I heard the rifles. Elias closed his eyes. He knew the sound, the flat, cracking pop of Springfield carbines. I heard him scream. Nalin whispered. It was not a warrior's scream. It was a sound of surprise. And then, silence. Just the boots of the soldiers crunching on the gravel. I lay there for hours. When I came out, the corn was burned. The wickiups were ash, and he was lying by the fire, his eyes open, looking at the sky. She turned to Elias. In the flash of lightning, her face was stark, stripped of all defenses. I grew up hating you, she said. Not you, Elias, but the idea of you, the white man who leads the killers. I promised myself I would never let one of you near me. I promised I would cut the throat of any bluecoat I found. Elias swallowed. The lump in his throat felt like broken glass. I see them too, he said. His voice was a rasp, rougher than the stone behind him. I see the faces, not just your father. I see the woman at Sibicu. She was running with a baby. I shouted at the sergeant to hold fire. He didn't. Elias looked at his hands. They were shaking. I wake up at night sweating, reaching for a rifle that isn't there. I try to drink enough whiskey to drown them, but they learn to swim. That map, I kept it because I was afraid if I threw it away, I would forget the cost. I wanted to remember that I am not a good man. I wanted to remember that I have a debt that can never be paid. Naylin looked at him. She saw the tears mixing with the rain on his face. She saw the profound, crushing weight of his guilt. It was not a performance. It was a living thing, heavy as the stones around them. He was not a monster. He was a man who had broken himself against the wheel of a war he couldn't stop. The anger that had fueled her for days, the hot coal of betrayal she had carried since finding the map, began to hiss and cool in the wash of his pain. She realized, with a sudden clarity, that they were both orphans of the same violence. They were both bleeding from wounds that would never fully close. A bolt of lightning struck the canyon rim above them, the thunder cracking instantly like a whip. Naylin flinched, a sharp, involuntary gasp escaping her lips. Reflexively, without thinking, Elias moved. He uncrossed his arms and pulled her closer, his hand gripping her shoulder to steady her. I've got you, he murmured. Naylin didn't pull away. She didn't strike him. Instead, she collapsed. The tension that had held her spine rigid snapped. She leaned into him, burying her face in the wet fabric of his shirt, her forehead resting against his chest. She could feel his heart. It was hammering against his ribs, wild and fast, a frantic rhythm that matched her own. Elias froze for a second, terrified that he'd overstepped, that she would push him into the rain, but when he felt her sob, a dry, hitching sound against his chest, he wrapped both arms around her. He held her as if she were made of glass, his chin resting on the top of her head. I am sorry, he whispered into her hair. I am so sorry. Naylin gripped the front of his shirt, her fists bunching the fabric. She looked up. The movement brought their faces inches apart. The lightning flashed again, illuminating the dark pools of her eyes, the part of her lips, the water dripping from her lashes. The space between them was charged, electric with the storm and the raw, bleeding emotions they had just laid bare. The anger was gone, replaced by a desperate, aching need. A need to be held, a need to be alive, a need to forget, just for a moment, the death that waited for them at the end of the trail. Elias, she breathed. She lifted her face. Elias looked at her, searching for permission, searching for forgiveness. He saw it in the way her breath hitched, in the way her gaze dropped to his mouth. He lowered his head. Their lips met. It was not a gentle kiss. It was fierce, salty with tears and rain, desperate and hungry. It was the kiss of two people clinging to a cliff edge, finding the only solid purchase in each other. Naylin made a low sound in her throat and opened her mouth to him. She wrapped her arms around his neck, pulling him down, dragging him closer until there was no air left between them. Elias groaned, his hands tangling in her wet hair, tilting her head back, deepening the kiss until the world outside the cave ceased to exist. The cold was forgotten. The fire that ignited between them was sudden and consuming. Elias treated her body with a reverence that bordered on worship, his hands tracing the line of her spine, the curve of her hip, desperate to memorize her. He touched her not as a conquest, but as a salvation. Naylin met him with equal force. She touched the scars on his chest, the rough stubble on his jaw, grounding herself in the reality of him. He was solid. He was here. He was the enemy who had saved her, the killer who wept for the dead, in the dark, damp shelter. With the storm raging like the end of days, they came together. It was a frantic, fumbling union, hindered by wet clothes and exhaustion, but it was pure. It was an act of defiance against the death that stalked them. They pressed skin to skin, seeking warmth, seeking oblivion. Elias whispered her name against her neck, his voice breaking. He whispered apologies. He whispered promises he wasn't sure he could keep. Naylin silenced him with her mouth, demanding only his presence, his heat, his life. They fell asleep hours later, entangled in the damp coat, limbs braided together. Elias lay with his back to the cave entrance, shielding her from the wind, his hand resting protectively over hers. Naylin slept with her head on his shoulder, her breathing matching the rhythm of his. For one night, the war was over. The morning brought a sky of brutal, scoured blue. The storm had washed the world clean, leaving the rocks slick and the air sharp with the scent of sage and ozone. Elias woke first. He lay still for a moment, the weight of Nalin's head on his arm anchoring him to the earth. He remembered the night. He remembered the taste of her skin. A profound sadness settled over him, mixed with a fierce, terrifying protectiveness. He knew that what had happened changed everything, and yet changed nothing. The world would still see them as enemies. Her sisters would still hate him. Harlan Pierce was still waiting. He shifted, and Naylin woke. She sat up, pushing hair from her face. She looked at him. Her eyes were clear, unguarded. There was no shame in them, only a quiet, somber acknowledgement of the bond that now existed. "The rain has stopped," she said softly. Elias sat up, his joints aching. "We need to move. The water will be dropping. Taza and Badal will be waiting." They stood up, adjusting their damp clothes. They stood on the ledge, looking out at the canyon. Elias turned to her. He reached out and brushed a stray lock of hair behind her ear. "Nalin," he said, "about last night." "It happened," she said, cutting him off gently. "Do not try to name it. Elias, words are small things." She took his hand, squeezed it once, hard, and then let go. "Let us go find our children." They climbed down the slick rock face, moving in silence. They found Taza and Bidal 3 miles downstream, waiting near a high ridge. The warriors looked at them, sensing the shift in the air, the way Elias and Nalin moved in sync. But they said nothing. There was no time for questions. They picked up the trail of the posse. It was easy to follow now. The heavy rain had washed away the surface dust, but the deep churn of 30 horses in the mud was unmistakable. The trail led south, out of the mountains and into the flat, unforgiving scrublands that bordered the territory line. The journey pushed them to the edge of endurance. The horses were tired, their ribs showing through their coats. The riders were worse. They ran out of food on the second day. They ate the tart, red fruit of the prickly pear cactus, burning the thorns off in small fires, the juice staining their mouths like blood. They sucked on pebbles to keep saliva in their mouths. They slept in shallow hollows, taking turns to watch, shivering in the cold desert nights. Elias gave Nalin the best spot, blocking the wind with his body, but he did not touch her again. The mission required a razor-sharp focus. On the 4th day, they saw the town. It was a cluster of adobe and wood sitting near a muddy trickle of a river. Rio Verde, a place where the law was bought and sold, and where men like Harlan Pierce did business away from the prying eyes of the territorial governor. They left the horses in a dry wash 2 miles out and approached on foot, moving belly down through the sagebrush. Elias lay on a ridge, peering through a small brass telescope he carried. "I see them," he whispered. "Where?" Naylin asked, crawling up beside him. "The livery stable at the north end. See the guard?" She looked. A man with a rifle was sitting on a crate outside the stable doors. "The children will be in the back stalls," Elias said. "It's where they keep high-value stock before an auction." "And the girl? Kaya's daughter?" Elias scanned the street. He moved the glass to the saloon, a large building with a false front. "There," he said, his voice tightening. "Upper window, barred. That's the storeroom. Pierce likes to keep his prizes close." He lowered the telescope and slid back down the ridge to where Taza and Beidel waited. "Here is the situation," Elias said, drawing a map in the dust with his finger. "The children are in the stable. 2 guards, maybe 3 inside. The girl is in the saloon. That will be harder. The saloon is full of men. Pierce is likely there too. We strike at night, Taza said. Throat cutting. Too many risks. Elias said. The stable floor is dry straw. 1 lantern kicked over and the whole place goes up with the children inside. And the saloon. You can't sneak into a crowded room. Then how? Vidal asked. We need a diversion, Elias said. A big one. Something that pulls every eye and every gun to one spot. He looked at the town, then at the Apache warriors. I will go in, Elias said. You? Taza scoffed. You are 1 man. I will go into the saloon, Elias said calmly. I will call Harlan Pierce out. I will make a scene. I will make them so angry they forget everything else. While they are focused on me. You take the stable. Taza, you and Bidal get the children. Hami. No, Hami's gone. Nalin, you wait with the horses. No, Nalin said instantly. Once the children are clear, Elias continued, ignoring her. You circle back to the saloon. By then, the fight will be started. You break the girl out from the back. It is suicide, Vidal said, staring at Elias. Once the shooting starts, you will be the only target. I know, Elias said. He stood up, checking the knife at his belt. It was a paltry weapon against 30 guns. I need a pistol, he said. Taza looked at him. For the first time, there was no sneer on the young warrior's face. He reached into his belt and pulled out an old Colt Navy revolver he had taken from a dead soldier years ago. He handed it to Elias. It pulls to the left. Taza said. Elias checked the cylinder. 5 shots. He nodded. Thank you. He turned to go. Elias! Nalin grabbed his arm. Her grip was desperate. She pulled him away from the others, her eyes wide with panic. You cannot do this, she hissed. You are throwing your life away. It's the only way. Nalin, they need to look at me so they don't see Taza. But you will die, she cried, her voice breaking. I just found you. Do not leave me now. Elias looked down at her. He saw the fear in her eyes, a fear not for herself, but for him. It was a gift he hadn't expected to receive in this life. He reached up and gently cupped her face in his hands. His thumbs brushed the tears from her cheeks. His palms were rough, calloused, but his touch was tender. Nalin, listen to me, he said softly. For 10 years, I have walked around like a dead man. I have carried a weight that bent me double. I drew the lines that destroyed your world. He leaned his forehead against hers. If I die tonight making sure those children go home, if I die saving what Pierce is trying to steal, then that is the first truly right thing I have done since I put on that uniform. Don't take that from me, Nalin sobbed, a sharp, wounded sound. She gripped his wrists, trying to anchor him to the earth. Come back to me, she begged. Promise me. I promise I will try, Elias said. He kissed her. It was different from the kiss in the cave. That had been hunger. This was goodbye. It was slow, aching, and filled with everything they hadn't had time to say. He pressed his mouth to hers, breathing in her scent, memorizing the feel of her. He pulled away reluctantly. He looked at Taza and Vidal. Give me 10 minutes, Elias said, then hit the stable. He turned and walked down the slope toward the town, his silhouette long and solitary against the setting sun. Nalin watched him go, her hand pressed to her mouth to stifle her scream. Elias walked down the main street of Rio Verde. The dust puffed under his boots. The town was waking up for the night. Piano music drifted from the saloon. Laughter. The smell of frying steak. He felt calm. A strange, icy clarity had settled over him. He wasn't afraid. He pushed through the swinging doors of the Golden Steer Saloon. The room was crowded. Smoke hung in the air. At the far end, playing cards at a large round table, sat Harlan Pierce. He was laughing at something Sheriff Grady had said. Elias walked to the center of the room. He stood there, legs braced, hands hanging loose at his sides. Harlan, he shouted. The room went quiet. The piano player stopped mid-chord. Harlan Pierce looked up. He squinted through the smoke. A slow, incredulous smile spread across his face. Well, well, he drawled. If it isn't the squaw lover, I thought my boys left you for the vultures in the canyon." Elias didn't move. "You missed," he said. Pierce laughed. He leaned back in his chair, hooking his thumbs in his vest. "You came a long way to die. Carter, you here to beg for a job? Or did you come to sell us the rest of the Apaches? I came to tell you something." "Harlan," Elias said, his voice carrying to every corner of the room. "I was a scout for the 3rd Cavalry," Elias said. "I rode for Crook. I rode for Miles. I tracked men who fought for their land, but I never rode for a child thief." A murmur went through the room. "You watch your mouth," Pierce growled, his smile vanishing. "I see you," Elias said, raising his voice. "I see all of you. You call yourselves men? You ride in with 30 guns to steal babies? You take a 7-year-old boy and lock him in a horse stall? That ain't soldiering. That's cowardice." He looked around the room, meeting the eyes of the men. "You're filth," Elias spat. "All of you. You're scared of starving women, so you steal their children to feel big." Pierce stood up, his face purple. "That's enough. Cut him down." Elias saw the movement. A man at the bar reached for his gun. Elias drew. The Colt Navy flashed. Bang! The man at the bar yelled, clutching his shoulder, his gun clattering to the floor. Panic erupted. Men dove for cover, overturning tables. Elias didn't run. He stood his ground. Firing again. Bang! He shot the whiskey bottle on Pierce's table, showering the rancher with glass and liquor. "Come on!" Elias roared. "Come and get me!" Pierce scrambled for his rifle. "Kill him! Shoot him!" 3 men opened fire from the corner. Bullets chewed up the floorboards around Elias's feet. A slug tore through the sleeve of his coat, grazing his arm. Elias fired back, aiming not to kill, but to suppress, to keep their heads down, to keep the noise loud. Outside, in the darkness, Taza and Bidal sprinted for the stable. The guard, distracted by the gunfire in the saloon, was standing up, looking toward the street. Taza was on him in a second. The knife flashed silent and efficient. Inside the saloon, the air was thick with black powder smoke. Elias dove behind the bar as a hail of lead shattered the mirror behind him. He checked the cylinder. 2 shots left. He popped up and fired. Bang! He saw Pierce ducking behind the piano. "You can't hide! Harlan!" Elias shouted. "Everyone knows what you are now!" A searing pain punched through Elias's thigh. He grunted. Stumbling, a bullet had punched through the wood of the bar and caught him in the meat of his leg. He dragged himself to the end of the bar. He could hear shouting outside now. "The stable!" "Fire!" Someone yelled in the street. "The stable is on fire!" It was the signal. Elias gritted his teeth. He had to buy them a few more seconds. He stood up, exposing himself. "Is that all you got?" he screamed, firing his last shot at the chandelier, bringing it crashing down in a shower of crystal and kerosene. The room erupted in flame and chaos. Elias turned and threw himself through the side window. He landed in the alleyway, glass cutting his hands. He scrambled up, putting weight on his bad leg, and limped toward the street. He saw them, down the street. Shadows were moving. Taza carrying a child, Bidal herding 2 others, and Nalin. Nalin was running from the back of the saloon, half carrying the teenage girl. They were clear, but the men from the saloon were pouring out the front doors, guns drawn. "There they are," Pierce shouted, pointing at the fleeing Apaches. They got the stock. Elias didn't hesitate. He stepped out into the middle of the street, directly between the mob and the escaping group. He threw the empty pistol at them. "Over here," he screamed, waving his arms. "Look at me." The mob turned. 20 guns leveled at the lone figure standing in the dust. "Run!" Elias shouted to Nalin, not looking back. "Go!" He saw Nalin stop. He saw her turn. "Go!" he screamed, his voice raw. And then the world exploded. Elias felt a hammer blow to his shoulder, then another to his ribs. He was spun around, his boots losing purchase in the dust. He fell hard, the breath driven from him. He lay on his back, staring up at the stars. They looked cold and very far away. He heard hoofbeats fading into the distance, fast, rhythmic hoofbeats. They were away. They were safe. A shadow fell over him. Harlan Pierce stood there, panting. a smoking pistol in his hand. "You son of a bitch," Pierce spat. Elias looked up at him. Blood bubbled on his lips. He tried to smile. "I quit," Elias whispered. Pierce raised the gun to finish it, but from the darkness of the hills, a single rifle shot rang out. Pierce's hat flew off his head. He ducked, cursing. "They're in the rocks," someone yelled. "Take cover. The mob scattered, fearing an ambush." Elias lay in the dirt, the sounds of the battle fading into a dull roar in his ears. Darkness crept in from the edges of his vision, soft and welcoming. He closed his eyes. He had paid the debt. He had washed the map clean. And the last thing he saw before the dark took him was the face of the woman he loved, safe in the mountains. The hoofbeats of the retreating horses hammered a frantic rhythm against the hard-packed earth of the Badlands. It was a desperate flight, a chaotic scramble through the dark, guided only by the fear of pursuit and the instinct to survive. Naylin rode near the back, her body curled tight over the neck of her paint pony, one hand gripping the reins, the other clutching the arm of the teenage girl they had pulled from the saloon. Behind them, the lights of Rio Verde faded into a dull, orange glow against the night sky. Gunshots still echoed sporadically, popping like dry wood in a fire. But they were growing fainter. They were safe. The children were safe. Shavata was clinging to Taza's waist, sobbing quietly into the warrior's shirt. The baby was secure in Bidal's arm. They had done the impossible. They had walked into the lion's den and walked out with their future intact. But the cost? Naylin turned in her saddle, risking a glance back toward the town. The dust raised by their escape hung in the air, obscuring the road. Somewhere back there, in the blood-soaked dirt of the main street, a man lay alone. She remembered his face in the alleyway, the bruises, the way he had looked at her, as if she were the only source of light in a dark world. She remembered his voice, rough with conviction, telling her that this sacrifice would be the first right thing he had done in years. "Elias," she whispered, the name tearing at her throat. "Don't look back." Taza shouted from the front, his voice harsh but edged with a new, grim respect. "We ride until the moon is high." They pushed the horses until the animals were lathered and blowing hard, their sides heaving. They scrambled up shale slopes where the iron shoes sparked against flint. They wound through labyrinthine canyons where the shadows swallowed them whole. Naylin rode in a daze. Her leg throbbed, a dull ache that seemed distant compared to the gaping hollow in her chest. She had hated him. She had loved him. And now, she had lost him. The unfairness of it tasted like ash in her mouth. Just when the walls between them had crumbled, just when the rain had washed away the history of the map, the world had snatched him away. He gave his life for a debt, Bidal said quietly as they slowed to a walk hours later. "It is a good death. It is a waste," Naylin snapped, her grief flashing into anger. "He should be here. He should be riding with us." Bidal fell silent. There were no words for this kind of loss. They reached the hidden camp 2 days later. The sentries saw them coming and raised the cry. Women ran from the wickiups, weeping with joy as they saw the children. Sani and Kaya rushed forward, pulling the teenage girl down from the horse, embracing her, touching her face to make sure she was real. The camp erupted in a celebration that was half funeral. Drums beat a low, steady rhythm. Food was brought out. The story of the rescue was told around the fire, how Taza silenced the guard, how the stable burned, and how the white scout stood alone in the street to draw the fire of 30 guns. Naylin could not celebrate. She sat by the edge of the fire, staring into the flames, feeling the ghost of his coat around her shoulders. She waited. She watched the canyon entrance, hoping against logic, hoping against hope. But the sun rose and set, and the entrance remained empty. 3 days passed. The grief in Naylin's heart began to harden into a cold, heavy stone. She went through the motions of living. She hauled water. She ground corn. But her eyes were dead. On the 4th afternoon, the heat was a physical weight, pressing the canyon into silence. The vultures were circling high above the southern rim. black specks against the blinding blue. A child playing near the stream looked up and pointed. "Someone comes!" Nalin dropped the basket she was holding. She spun around. A figure was moving through the shimmering heat haze at the mouth of the canyon. It was not riding. It was not walking. It was stumbling, a lurching, uneven gait that spoke of catastrophic injury. The figure fell. Then, slowly, agonizingly, it pushed itself back up. Nalin began to run. She forgot her cane. She forgot her pain. She ran with a desperate, lung-burning speed. It was him. Elias Carter looked like something the desert had chewed up and spat out. His clothes were stiff with dried blood. His face was a mask of sunburn and dust. His lips cracked and white. He was leaning heavily on a piece of driftwood, dragging his left leg. He looked up as she approached. His eyes were glassy, fever bright, seeing things that weren't there. "Nalin?" He croaked. He took one more step and collapsed. Nalin caught him. She went to her knees in the dust, taking his weight, her arms going around his ruined body. He smelled of infection and iron. "Elias!" she screamed. "Help me!" Warriors came running. Sani and Kaya were close behind. They stopped, staring at the man lying in their sister's arms. He was supposed to be dead. He had been shot. He had been left to the mercy of Harlan Pierce. And yet, he had crawled across 40 miles of hell to come back. "Water!" Nalin yelled at them. "Get the medicine man!" They carried him to Nalin's wickiup. The medicine man. A wizened elder named Goklaya worked with swift, grim precision. He cut away the filthy trousers. The bullet was still in his thigh, festering. Another graze marked his ribs. His shoulder was purple and yellow with bruising. He was dehydrated to the point of death. For 2 days and 2 nights, Elias burned with fever. He thrashed on the buffalo robes, crying out in his delirium. He did not speak of the rescue. He spoke of the old days. He apologized to the ghosts. He called out orders to soldiers who were long dead. And he called for Nalin. "I'm here," she whispered, holding his hand, bathing his forehead with cool water. "I'm here. Elias, stay with me." Sani sat in the corner of the wickiup, watching. She watched her sister tend to the white man. She watched the way Elias gripped Nalin's hand even in his sleep, as if she were the only anchor keeping him from drifting away into the dark. "He is strong," Sani said quietly on the second night. "A white man usually dies from a wound like that in this heat. He is stubborn," Nalin said, wiping his face. "He refuses to leave." "Perhaps," Sani said, looking at the fire. "Or perhaps he simply has a reason to stay." On the third morning, the fever broke. Elias opened his eyes. They were clear. He looked at the roof of the wickiup. He looked at Nalin, who was asleep sitting up, her head resting on the edge of the bed. He moved his hand. Nalin woke instantly. "You are alive," she whispered, tears filling her eyes. "I think so," Elias rasped. His voice sounded like gravel grinding together. "You walked back with a bullet in you. I promised," he said. "I promised I would try." Nalin leaned down and kissed his forehead, her lips trembling. "You are a fool, Elias Carter, the biggest fool in the territory." As Elias's strength returned, the atmosphere in the camp began to shift. The initial awe of his survival faded, replaced by the old, gnawing tension. He was still white. He was still a former scout. And now, he was a magnet for trouble. "Harlan Pierce is not dead," Taza reported one evening at the council fire. Elias sat nearby, propped up against a log, pale but listening. "He lives?" Elias asked. Taza nodded. "You shot the whiskey, not the man. He is alive, and he is humiliated. The whole town knows that a single white man and a handful of Apache outsmarted him. He is screaming for blood. He has gone to the fort," Bidal added. "He has demanded the army finish what he started. He claims we are insurrectionists. He claims we are hoarding weapons to attack the settlements." The elders looked at each other. This was the end game. Orders came 3 days later. A rider left a packet attached to a stake at the canyon entrance. A coward's delivery. It was a formal proclamation from the Department of the Territory. Relocation Order 704. The band was to be disarmed and marched to the San Carlos reservation immediately. Any resistance would be met with deadly force. "They are coming," Elias said, reading the paper. "Captain Miller won't have a choice now." Pierce has forced his hand. "We should run," an elder said, "into the deep mountains." "We cannot run with the wounded," Sonny argued. "We cannot run with the babies. They will catch us in the open flats." "Then we fight here," Elias said. He pulled himself up, wincing as his leg took his weight. He looked at the warriors. He looked at the chief. "This canyon is a fortress if you use it right. We don't meet them in the open. We don't stand in lines like soldiers. We make the land fight for us." He grabbed a stick and began to draw in the dirt. "Here, at the choke point. We weaken the rock walls. Here, in the willows, we dig pits. We make them bleed for every yard. We make the cost so high that the captain loses his stomach for it." Some of the warriors looked skeptical. "Why should we listen to you?" one asked. "You are the reason they come." "They come because they want your land," Elias said hard. "I am just the excuse. But I know Captain Miller. He is a cautious man. If he loses 5 men in the first minute, he will pull back. He wants a victory, not a massacre of his own troops." The chief looked at Elias. He saw the fire in the scout's eyes. He saw the way Nayland stood beside him, her hand resting lightly on his shoulder. "We will listen," the chief said. "Teach us the white man's trap." The preparations took 4 days. The camp was transformed. The women and children were moved to a high, inaccessible shelf in the caves at the back of the canyon. The warriors turned the valley floor into a kill zone. Elias worked alongside them, leaning on a crutch he had fashioned from a mesquite branch. He showed them how to create crossfires. He showed them how to build breastworks that looked like natural brush. He became the architect of their defense. On the 5th morning, the sentries signaled, "Dust." They came in force this time, a full column of cavalry, 60 men, riding in formation. Flanking them were Harlan Pierce and 20 of his hired guns. They brought a light mountain howitzer, a small cannon dragged on a carriage. They marched into the canyon mouth, the sun glinting off brass buttons and steel barrels. Elias lay behind a boulder on the high ridge. A Winchester rifle, returned to him by the chief, resting on the stone. Nayland lay beside him, her own rifle ready. "Wait," Elias whispered. "Let them get to the White Rock." The column advanced. The canyon was silent. Too silent. Captain Miller raised his hand to halt. He sensed it. "Sergeant," he called out. "Deploy skirmishers." Before the order could be obeyed, Elias stood up. He stood in full view on the ridge, silhouetted against the sky. "Captain Miller!" Elias shouted. The soldiers looked up. Pierce looked up, his face twisting in rage. "Carter!" Pierce screamed. "Shoot him! Shoot the traitor!" "Hold fire," Captain Miller ordered. He rode forward a few paces. "Elias Carter, you are alive?" "I am," Elias yelled back. "And I am telling you to turn around. Captain!" "You are in violation of territorial law, Carter. You are harboring hostiles. I am standing with free people." Elias's voice echoed off the canyon walls. "These people have done nothing but defend their children from that man beside you." He pointed at Pierce. "Harlan Pierce is a kidnapper and a thief, and if you ride with him, Captain, you are no better." "That's enough," Pierce roared. He raised his rifle and fired a wild shot at the ridge. The bullet spanged off the rock feet from Elias. "That," Elias said grimly, "was a mistake." He dropped his hand. On the opposite ridge, Taza cut a rope. A massive section of the canyon wall, loosened by days of prying, gave way. Tons of red rock crashed down behind the column, blocking their retreat and sending a cloud of choking dust into the air. The horses screamed and reared. "Now!" Elias shouted. The Apache opened fire. They did not fire to kill the soldiers. Elias had been clear. "Kill the horses if you must. Kill Pierce's men. But pin the soldiers." Bullets kicked up dust around the troops. The narrow confines of the canyon amplified the noise into a deafening roar. The soldiers, panicked by the rock slide and the sudden ambush, scrambled for cover. Pierce's men, less disciplined, began to fire blindly into the cliffs. Elias worked the lever of his Winchester. Crack, clack. Boom! He shot the hat off a rancher. Crack, clack. Boom! He hit the wheel of the cannon, shattering the spokes. It was chaos. The dust was so thick it was like fighting in a fog. Suddenly, through the haze, Elias saw movement on the lower slope. Harlan Pierce had abandoned his men. He was climbing the scree, scrambling toward a lower ledge where Nalin was positioned. He had seen her. His obsession with the woman who had defied him had overridden his sense of survival. "Nalin!" Elias shouted. Nalin turned. She raised her rifle, but Pierce was fast for a big man. He fired from the hip. The bullet struck the rock near her face, sending stone shards into her eyes. She cried out, blindingly, dropping her gun. "You witch!" Pierce screamed, scrambling over the lip of the ledge. "You ruined everything." He raised his revolver, aiming point blank at her. Elias didn't think. He didn't check his footing. He threw himself off the high ridge, sliding and tumbling down the shale slope. He hit the ledge just as Pierce cocked the hammer. "No!" Elias slammed into Pierce. The gun went off, the bullet tearing through the sleeve of Elias's coat. They crashed to the ground, rolling over sharp stones. Pierce was heavier, stronger, fueled by rage. He got on top of Elias, his hands going for Elias's throat. "I'll kill you!" Pierce shrieked, spitting blood. "I'll kill you both!" Elias gasped, choking. He clawed at Pierce's face, but the rancher's grip was like iron. Black spots danced in Elias's vision. Then a shadow loomed. Nalin, eyes streaming tears, swung her heavy rifle stock. It connected with the side of Pierce's head with a sickening thud. Pierce slumped, his grip loosening. Elias shoved him off. Pierce rolled. He rolled to the edge of the ledge. He clawed at the air, his eyes wide with sudden realization. The ledge gave way. Harlan Pierce fell. He fell 50 feet, crashing onto the rocks below in full view of the soldiers and the Apache. He did not move. The shooting stopped. Silence rushed back into the canyon, ringing in their ears. Captain Miller looked at the broken body of the rancher. He looked up at the ridge, where Elias and Nalin stood side by side, breathing hard, their hands clasped together. He looked at his own men, dusted and shaken, but mostly alive. He realized he had been led into a trap by a man who knew exactly how to dismantle a regiment without slaughtering it. "Cease fire!" Miller bellowed. He rode forward, waving a white handkerchief. "Carter!" he shouted. Elias leaned over the edge. "It's over. Captain, Pierce is dead. The fight is done." Miller looked at the blockage behind him. He looked at the defensive positions he could now see on the cliffs, positions that could have wiped his unit out if the Apache had chosen to shoot to kill. He took a deep breath. He was a career soldier. He knew when a battle was pointless. "We are withdrawing," Miller called out. "I will report that the instigator of this violence has been neutralized." He paused. "But tell them to stay in the canyon. Carter, if I see them raiding the valley again, I will bring a howitzer that works. It was an imperfect piece. It was a lie written in a report, but it was survival." "We hear you," Elias shouted back. Miller signaled his men. They began the slow, humiliating work of clearing the rocks enough to lead their horses out. Elias turned to Nalin. She wiped the dust from her eyes. She looked at him, and then she smiled. It was a fierce, wild smile. "We won," she whispered. "We survived," Elias corrected, pulling her into his arms. "Which is the only kind of winning there is out here." That evening, the camp gathered. The fires were lit high. There was mourning for the wounded, but there was a palpable sense of relief. The cloud that had hung over them for weeks, the threat of Pierce, was gone. The chief called Elias to the center of the circle. Elias walked without his crutch, though he limped heavily. He stood before the elders. He stood before the warriors who had beaten him. He stood before Sani and Kaya. Sani stepped forward. She looked at Elias for a long time. Her face was stern, but the hardness in her eyes had softened. "You bled," she said. "I did," Elias answered. "You stood before your own people and called them cowards. You fought the man who hated us. You took the bullet meant for my sister. She turned to the tribe. This man brought ghosts to us, she said, her voice carrying clearly in the night air. And he will always carry those ghosts. But today, he brought life. He has paid his debt. She looked back at Elias. You are no longer a prisoner. Elias Carter, you are free to go. Elias stood still. He looked at the open desert beyond the firelight. He could leave. He could ride north. Find a new name. A new life. He looked at Nalin. She was standing with her sisters, her hands clasped in front of her, watching him with an intensity that stopped his breath. I have nowhere to go, Elias said. My home is here. If you will have me. Sani nodded. She stepped aside, clearing the path between Elias and Nalin. That is not for us to decide, Sani said. Nalin stepped into the center. She walked to Elias. She did not limp. She walked with her head high. She stopped in front of him. The firelight danced in her eyes. You are a difficult man to kill, she said softly. I have a lot to live for, Elias replied. Nalin turned to her people. This man, she said, her voice ringing out. This man has seen the worst of us and the worst of himself. He has walked through the storm and the flood. He is marked by the past, as I am. She took Elias's hand. Her grip was strong. The world wants us to be enemies, she said. The world wants us dead, but I choose life, and I choose him. She looked at Elias. I love you. Elias. Elias felt his knees grow weak. The emotion was a tidal wave, overwhelming his exhaustion. He made to kneel, to bow before her as a suitor should in his own culture. No, Nalin said sharply. She pulled him up, forcing him to stand tall. We do not kneel, she said fiercely. You have spent enough time on your knees in the dirt. We stand, side by side, not above, not below, side by side. Elias looked at her, tears stinging his eyes. Side by side. He whispered. The ceremony was simple. It happened right there, under the vast canopy of stars that spanned the Dragoon Mountains. The medicine man brought a braided cord of leather and yucca fiber. He bound their left hands together, Elias's scarred hand and Nalin's strong one. He spoke words of blessing, calling on the spirits of the mountains, the wind, and the water to witness the union. He spoke of the balance between the hawk and the earth, the storm and the stone. The children, Chivato among them, ran forward scattering dried flower petals and kernels of yellow corn at their feet. The warriors beat the drums, a slow, heartbeat rhythm that echoed off the canyon walls. Elias looked at Nalin. In the firelight, she was beautiful. Not the beauty of a painting, but the beauty of a survivor. She was scars and strength and fierce, burning love. I promise, Elias said, his voice low. Only for her. I promise to stand. I promise to stay. I promise to hold you. Nalin whispered back. When the ghosts come. The wind picked up, swirling the smoke and the corn silk, carrying their vows up out of the canyon and into the vast, dark silence of the west. Months later. The cabin was small, built of stone and timber near the bend of the stream where the cottonwoods grew thickest. It was a blend of two worlds, a chimney of river rock, a roof of woven brush and clay. A small field of corn struggled against the dry earth nearby, green shoots pushing up with stubborn determination. Elias sat on a log bench outside the door. He was mending a bridle. His limp was still there, a permanent hitch in his step, and the scar on his cheek had faded to a thin white line. He looked older, but the haunted look in his eyes was gone, replaced by a watchful peace. Nalin sat beside him. She was sewing a shirt of buckskin. Chivato and the other children were playing in the creek, their laughter drifting on the breeze. Elias stopped his work. He looked at the horizon. A plume of dust was rising in the distance. An army patrol, miles away. Riding the border. He watched it. He felt the old tension tighten his gut, but then he felt Nalin's hand on his knee. They are just passing, she said, not looking up from her sewing. I know, Elias said. He covered her hand with his. They sat there as the sun began to dip below the jagged peaks, painting the sky in violent purples and blood reds. It was a harsh land. It was a land that tried to kill you every day with thirst, with heat, with hate. But as the first stars began to prick the velvet darkness above them, Elias put his arm around his wife's waist. She rested her head on his shoulder. They were outcasts. The white world called him a traitor. The Apache world called her the woman who married the wolf. But here, in this rough, wild corner of the map that Elias had once drawn and then erased with his own blood, they had carved out a space. It was fragile. It was stubborn. And it was theirs. Elias took a deep breath of the cooling air, smelling the sage and the smoke. "We are home," he whispered. Naylin closed her eyes and smiled against his shirt. "Yes," she said, "we are home." Thank you for listening to this story of Elias and Naylin. It was a journey of redemption and resilience in a land that offered no mercy. I would love to know where you are listening from. Please leave a comment below with your location. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to From Wild West for more tales of the frontier. I invite you to share your thoughts on the ending and the choices the characters made in English in the comments section. Safe travels to you all.